Morning. We move on, just want to do a few more recognitions. One more time, please, a round of applause for Bishop Hassan Matthew Kuka of the Catholic Archdiocese of Sokoto. Thank you very much, sir. With us, we also have Professor Bola Akiteriwe. He's also with us here. Please, a round of applause for him. We'd also like to recognize at this time Dr. Ibilola Amal. Please, a round of applause for her. And now to a point in time, one I'm personally looking forward to in terms of hearing from this gentleman, a former Nigerian head of state, one of our very well-known, appreciated, and recognized elder statesmen. But before he comes to the stage, just a quick background. General Yakubu Gowon was born October 19th, 1934 in Plateau State and joined the Nigerian Army in 1954, becoming a second lieutenant on his 21st birthday in 1995. Now, after doing many... My apologies. As I said it, my mind was calculating that, okay, but on his 21st birthday, my apologies, he attended the Royal Military Academy in Sandhurst in the United Kingdom, and as well as the Staff College in Cambridge in the UK, and the Joint Staff College, Latimer. On August 1st, he also, 1966, he became the military head of states for Nigeria. He acquired a politics, operating as an official observer at the Ghanaian presidential elections in 2008. There's much more that many of us know about General Gowon that is not here. And I know many people are looking forward to hearing his thoughts on today's theme. Is democracy really making life better in Africa? So please, ladies and gentlemen, to observe all protocol, I would ask that we stand on our feet as we welcome General Yakubu Gowon, who is the chairman of today's event, for his speech.
Thank you very much indeed. Well, now you can hear me because I can hear you too. Your Excellency George Weah, President of Liberia, ably represented by Mr. Eugene Len Nagbe, Minister of Information and Culture and Tourism of Liberia. Your Excellencies, my Lord Bishop Matthew Kuka, my Lords temporal and spiritual here present, our chief host, Professor Pat Utomi, and I think I must say I'm the chairman of CVL, Mrs. Ifoma Utome, eminent panelists and discussants, distinguished invited guests, ladies and gentlemen, may I say all protocols duly observed and append the appropriate protocol to your person. May I, as chairman, sincerely welcome you all to the 16th Center for Value in Leadership Annual Lecture and International Leadership Symposium, holding here at the Shell Hall Muson Center, Lagos. And I would like to say a big thank you to our chief host, Professor Pat Utome, for inviting me to chair the symposium, and every one of you here to individually participate in specific role. Professor Utome, and well done to the CVL leadership. Thank you, Chairman of CVL. I consider it expedient to specially commend the patriotic spirit of the leadership of the Center for Values in Leadership for organizing this symposium at such an auspicious time in Nigeria. The topic, it goes without saying, is especially appropriate for reasons that will become a lot clearer to us all by the time this event winds down. In 10 days, Nigeria will go to the polls to exercise their franchise to elect a new president to lead the nation for the next 4 years. This will make the 5th successive cycle in 20 years that citizens of our nation would have unfettered say in deciding who leads them. This has not always been so in the history of our soon to be 59 years of nationhood, given our record of military regnum since independence in October 1960. But it is a commendable measure of the depth of our growth and development as a nation. Indeed, it is a graphic illustration of my personal answer of yes to the question of the day: is democracy making life better in Africa? Is democracy making life better in Africa? As I said earlier, my answer to this question is a distinct and resounding yes. I look around and see that a good number of participants at this symposium have lived the history of Nigeria either on account of age or by learning, and might be tempted to conclude that my answer is a contradiction in terms. Why? Because I was a general in the armed forces of the Federal Republic of Nigeria, which had a record of interventions in governance. because I accidentally became head of state by virtue of the powers considered to issue forth from the barrel of the gun, which is very undemocratic. And because no general election was held during my time, 9 years in a 9-year term, as that is 2 terms, 2 terms, plus 1 year of grace, as military head of state. And this was done because for overstaying my time, and not because I did not want to ensure democracy was returned, but because, as the press put it at that time, because I renege the promise that I made to return government to civilian government in 1976. Have to continue, and you probably want to know the reason why. When I saw what the politicians, just before we gave them the go-ahead to start, when they started really haranguing themselves and doing things that was reminiscent to the period just before the January 1966 coup. I was honestly so afraid to see the same situation like the Operation Wete, the problem in the Middle Belt, etc. And I thought that this is certainly dangerous, to allow that to happen again, and for it to encourage another, another return of the military. So I decided to say, I think we better concentrate on the development, economic development of the country, and then when well, we can then really ensure to civilian rule. Well, this is just an aside so that you know why that was done. Well, to take this position is the important point that governance by the military is not necessarily anti-democracy. Whilst I was on board, just to tell you a story, while I was on board a ship, the MV Oriole, those of you who are old enough and used to travel to the UK by sea would remember the name of that, one of the vessels at that time. You have the Accra, and you have the Oriole, and you have the Apapa, isn't it? So there you are. Whilst I was on board a ship, MV Oriole, headed for Nigeria from Liverpool, UK, on the 31st of December, 1965. I think before many of you here were born. 1965. During that period, when a lot of the passengers from across the world, from UK, from from all the countries in West Africa, Gambia, Sierra Leone, Ghana, and Nigeria, when they knew that I was a military officer, they were asking a question. They were asking me a question. Do you think that a coup can take place in Nigeria? What really surprising, why are you asking me that question? I've just finished a course and I'm just returning home. But of course, at that time, it is the usual thing. You have coups in Central American nation, and then of course coups in African countries. You have coups in the Middle East and also in Asia. So that was the pattern. But why are people asking me this question? as though I was the one, although I was trying to plan a coup. And I was very surprised. And of course, I denied emphatically that this is not so. I said, no, we are an apolitical army. We are an apolitical army. We are loyal to the government. We are loyal to the government of the day. And we are supposed to protect the nation and to protect democracy. And so such a thing can never happen. But interestingly enough, by the time we got to Accra, there were 3 coups in Central and West Africa. And one of them was very close to Nigeria, whether it was Togo or Dahomey then. You know, and so when I was asked that question again, do you think that a coup can take place in Nigeria? What I said then, and honestly said then, well, now let me be a philosopher. If such a thing happens in Nigeria, that there is nothing impossible in the world, but if such a thing happens in Nigeria, I hope the few loyal ones of us, that is of the military, officers and men, will deal with the situation and return the status quo. Now, what is that status quo? Well, I leave you to think what it is. That is to return democracy, etc. Unfortunately, it did not happen that way, because 36 hours after that, when we arrived in Nigeria, after my arrival in Nigeria, there was a coup. And of course, the story is that, yes, I was one of those officers and men that made sure that that coup did not succeed in Lagos and in Nigeria, and ultimately in Nigeria as a whole. So at least you can see that I've been a believer in democracy, right from the beginning and right through. And of course, you will ask the question, then how did you become a military head of state? Because you said you are going to return the status quo. Now, the reason was that, yes, what happened and the events that happened after that really created a situation whereby I found myself, there was no way I can get away with it but to accept responsibility to lead the nation, so that at least one hope we can be able to, once things are brought back to normal and in order, we can be able to restore democracy as soon as possible. And of course, one promised at the appropriate time that this was going to be done until I reneged. But for a good reason, So what went wrong? Answers to that question are outside the immediate scope of today's event. But suffice it to say that in 20 years, Nigerians alike have continued to act in ways that make passions into politics both and unattractive regardless of the challenges of our democracy. By extension, it can safely be said that by our collective resolve to continue to vote and ensure that our votes count, we all are agreed that there are inherent benefits in entrenching democracy. The Nigerian example, again, by extension, has continued to spread across Africa, thus solidifying the tenets of democracy. One sure thing, though, is that democracy cannot be strengthened in the absence of enduring structures like the judiciary, the legislative, the public service, among others. But the strongest I consider being the public service. And all those institutions, of course, are public service. I speak from experience because back in the late 60s and mid-70s, my government benefited immediately from the experience of the rich pool of our public servants, civil servants, who were very well trained by the colonial administration and the government of the First Republic. A good civil service is one that is totally committed to the government of the day, regardless of the political party in power or their political belief. In this regard, the military also falls within the ambit of good public service. Civil servants, by simple definition, are custodians of policies and repository of institutional memory. The civil service that I knew and worked with embodied these ideals. Public service in Nigeria significantly lost its pride of place with the mass and premature retirement and unreasonable retirement of dedicated officers, particularly by my immediate successors in office. And many of these brilliant public servants, like late Samuel Manua, many died virtually penniless, having lived lives of contentment and luxury at that time that their salary at that time could support. Many of their successors learned not to take what could then be considered as oath of poverty and consequently replace national interest with personal interest and greed. This naturally caused many to begin to owe allegiance to power or ethnic or religious blocs that tend to promote their self-serving interest. In turn, this promoted the growth of cronyism and deep-rooted corruption, if only to avoid being what that late, well, I wouldn't call him crazy musician, fella, called such, he called, if only being called original Sufferhead. I think those who remember him know in family exactly what that means. It meant the soldiers are crazy. Sufferhead. Whilst the political restructuring of any nation is all well and good, it equally must be emphasized that without true reform of the public service, such restructuring efforts will almost and always come to note. I know a lot of the public servants that we have today, they are doing their best. They want to return to that sort of standard that is expected of them. And I wish them well, and I will encourage you, the younger ones, to imbibe those ideals, for the sake, of the nation that you serve. In a restructured entity, leaders will need to walk with and respect the civil service as an institution, else they should forget about spreading the proverbial dividend of democracy. I have deliberately used Nigeria to exemplify the issues of democracy in Africa because over the years, the country has played and continues to play a significant leadership role. In a manner of speaking, what is source for our goods is also source for other Ganda in Africa. It is thus heartwarming that the organizers of this symposium have ensured that the two keynote speakers, His Excellency Mr. George Opong Ware, the President of Liberia being represented, and Bishop Matthew Hassan Kuka, Catholic Bishop of Sokoto Diocese, eminently qualified to do justice to the topic of whether democracy is making life better in Africa today. One that is the president, by virtue of being on the hot seat now. And I remembered him when he first went, for this attempt to be president. I think this was, is it 2005, Honorable Minister? I was one of the, and I know I had a lot of contact with him, advised that they should have a peaceful election and must respect the result and peacefully get along. And if he makes it, all well and good. But if he fails, let him try again, and one day he will. And today, he is the president of Ghana. And if you remember, he is one of those great African footballers in the United Kingdom. And so he was king of the football. Now he is king of Liberia. Congratulations, Mr. President. So by virtue of having, so I think he has had from experience now, and so to say that democracy works. And now it is his turn to make sure that democracy works, that he looks after his people well. The thinking always must be the good, the good of the people, the well-being of the people, and that is always what any leader must always be thinking about. And you must try and get in touch with, with the people, get their views, and see in what way you can be able to resolve their problems. So having being in the hot seat means really hard work. Now, the other is, of course, by virtue of having extensively studied the condition of citizens and the various forms of government in Nigeria, even as a young man and secretary of the Catholic Church in Nigeria at one time, as a very, very young man. Yes, under all these various government in Nigeria, vis-a-vis his calling, as a man of God, Father Kuka certainly is fit to talk about democracy, at least in Nigeria, and I know his contact that he also has outside Nigeria. And then, of course, we have the panel of discussants, eminent discussants. They cannot be as any hotter. I think you can, from the program, you can see the list of those discussants. So it cannot be any hotter than as constituted, with varying professional interest and experiences as well. And I think women are represented, isn't it, in the team of the discussion. So at least there is respect for gender there as well, which is very, very important. And tell me, are youth represented? Are youth represented there? What age of youth? So with all this, with varying professional interests and experiences, as well as gender orientation, I think this will be a very interesting discussion. So in the circumstance, then I will qualify to be considered as chairman student. Yes, because I will be learning, even though I will not be able to participate in giving the leadership, but at least I will participate in making sure that I cast my vote for whoever it is that is lucky to get the vote to lead Nigeria tomorrow. So I qualify as a student willing to learn and modify my point of view in an age of enlightenment. Now, this is supposed to be a chairman short remark. Sorry if I've gone a bit too far, so forgive me, but I thought need to explain certain things in order to give the tone of this meeting. So I believe my job as chairman is now done, and so let me rest, let the rest of you, especially the discussants, will continue the work, and all of us will benefit from it. So thank you all for listening, and I wish us all a successful deliberations. Thank you.
Let's continue with a round of applause for General Yakubu Gowon, former head of state of the Federal Republic of Nigeria, as he makes his way to his seat. And I think one thing that that stood out to me in his opening remarks was talking about having to step in as head of state, but also feeling that he knew that democracy was the way to go. And he said it emphatically that he does believe democracy, please be seated, ladies and gentlemen, that he does believe democracy is making a difference. Now, I know this is a conversation that, in many aspects, many of us have had in our living rooms. We've listened to radio shows, we've listened to talk shows, we've had conversations on whether or not the dividends of democracy are making it down to the ordinary Nigerian on the street. And it will definitely be fascinating to hear what the panelists have to say about that. And I hope at the end of the day we can agree that there has been progress the system of government using democracy, not just for Nigeria, but other African countries. But we know that we can and have to do more. So as we continue to move things along, earlier I spoke about some of the programs and initiatives that the Center for Values and Leadership has spearheaded, and we'd like you to find out more about one of them. So a quick video about the leader without title. Please enjoy.
Why do we have the leader without title tribute colloquium? And one important thinking on leadership that affected me, that impacted me, was that offered by the Canadian Robin Sharma, that focuses on the leader who had no title. It was particularly interesting for me because our culture, our public culture in Nigeria, is very, very much authority focused. We find that the world is not getting moved forward so much by position as it is being moved forward by people who lead even when they don't have the title. And this series was designed to use as an example some of those people to educate the general community on the one hand, but particularly our emphasis, the young, to educate the young of our country and to recognize that it's not about your title.
The event today, wait for it, has categorically proved that the people who attain the age of 70 and above are not brain dead. For honoring Professor Sage at 74 and me at 83 on Sunday. Truly and certainly, we are mentally alive and brain alive.
Unless the rate of learning is equal to or greater than the pace of change in the environment, an organization is progressively becoming a dinosaur. You can say the same thing for an individual. Unless an individual is learning at a rate that is faster than the pace of change in the environment, that individual is becoming a dinosaur.
So Leader Without Title is just one of the initiatives that the CVL has spearheaded, and we'll see one or two more, but it's an opportunity to recognize those who continue to make a difference in their space. Yesterday, there was a story on social media, and it was about a gentleman in India whose son had died because of an accident at a pothole. And in the years following, he had single-handedly filled over 600 plus potholes in India. That is a man, one man. That's someone we could even say is a leader without title. So there is opportunity, there is space for each and every single one of us to do something and to make a difference. Leaders are not always the people who are recognized at the top and who have names and titles. Sometimes it's about leading in your circle of influence, leading in your family, leading in your neighborhood, even leading in your organization. But none of us have an excuse not to do the right thing and to show others the way. So ladies and gentlemen, we still have a few more people who want to recognize who have joined us this morning. Please, a round of applause for the Acting Vice Chancellor of the Edo State University, Professor E.O. Aluyor. Please, a round of applause for him. Thank you very much, sir. And there have been a few organizations that have partnered with the CVL in terms of making today's event possible. So please, let's recognize them as again. Coca-Cola has also helped in making today's event possible. We also have representing Mutual Benefits Assurance PLC, Mr. B.E. Ashiru Mobolaji. He's the Executive Director Operations. Please, a round of applause for him. Representing First Bank of Nigeria Holdings PLC, we have the Head of Risk Management, Mr. Idris Shitu. Please, a round of applause for him. And also, CVL receives support from General Electric International Operations Nigeria Limited. We have Dr. Joyce Shingo Wige in the studio, with us. Please, a round of applause for her. If you heard me, you'll hear me say in the studio, and I'm so used to that because that's where my sphere of influence has been so for many years. So studio come out, but I know this is an auditorium. Again, a round of applause for yourself. The program, and many more things are coming up. So a very big thank you to the sponsors and those who put this together, as well as many individuals as well who have helped the CVL and been a big support to the organization. We will keep things moving ahead, and sadly the President of Liberia, Mr. Honorable, His Excellency George Weah, would not be with us, but I will still read his citation before his representative comes up. The President, George Opong Weah of Liberia, is a Liberian politician and former professional footballer who is currently serving as the 25th President of Liberia in office since 2018. He had a 10-year professional career which ended in 2003 when he entered politics. He formed the Congress for Democratic Change and ran unsuccessfully for president in the 2005 elections. In the 2011 elections, he ran again unsuccessfully. But in 2017, he was elected president of Liberia, defeating the incumbent vice president, and was sworn in January 22nd, 2018. And something that our former head of state, General Yakubu Gowon, had said, he told him, if you fail once, if you fail twice, keep trying again. And he tried, and the third time became his lucky charm. So representing him today, we have the Honorable Minister of Information, Cultural Affairs, and Tourism. Please, ladies and gentlemen, let's give him a Nigerian welcome. Please, a round of applause for Honorable Eugene Nagbe.
Thanks a lot. His Excellency General Yakubu Gowon, former head of state of the Federal Republic of Nigeria, Professor Patrick Otome, founder, and Mrs. Otome, chair of the Center for Values in Leadership, Bishop Matthew Hassan, Bishop of the Catholic Archdiocese of Sokoto, panelists, distinguished ladies and gentlemen. I'm greatly honored to be standing here today representing a man who has become a beacon of hope for millions of people in my country. Our celebrate illustrious President George Manneh Weah. Just over a year ago, Liberians went to the polls and changed the state of affairs of our country. They elected as their president a man who had experienced the different extremes of life, from growing up in the slums of Monrovia, beset by poverty and inequality, to a life of stardom and luxury as a football star in Europe, yet remaining a humble humanitarian and a patriot through it all. President Weah is not your conventional, traditional politician. His election therefore shows that democracy is truly a powerful institution. It makes leaders out of persons and presidents. His leadership has ignited hope, not just for Liberian youths, but also for people across the world. It shows that they too can amount to anything with determination and hard work. The president laments his inability to be here today to personally convey his perspectives on the topic. He would have relished the opportunity had there not been other pressing issues of state which has prevented him from leaving Liberia at this time. He has therefore asked me to make a submission at this symposium, not an ad verbatim speech, but a submission which will capture his own perspectives on the imperatives for making democracy work for the people, the Liberian experience. Ladies and gentlemen, democracy can only work for the people if we create and strengthen institutions of the state apparatus to ensure good governance. Professor Otome, the president, has also asked me to use this opportunity to convey to you his best wishes on the occasion of your 63rd birth anniversary. Happy birthday, Prof. He has also asked me to thank you for your great contributions to the discourse for a better Africa and a better world. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, panelists, the story has been told over and again about the peculiar nature of we as SNSA to the Liberian presidency. Not only does it mark the first time in more than 70 years in my country that we have been able to witness a democratic transfer of power. 70 years. It also marked a movement for generational change. Mostly young people, and I can say that I'm one of the oldest in the cabinet. Mostly young people, particularly those who were previously regarded as underprivileged, are now at the helm of the leadership of our country. This has occasioned a renewed sense of vibrancy and a determination to effect change. It is sad that the message that we most time inadvertently communicate to young people by our society is that they are not really needed or ready to effect change. We dole out negligible portions of our national state resources to institutions and programs that should cater to their welfare and pay lip service also to their welfare. This situation usually results into disillusionment with the system, a situation which can be tapped onto and exploited by unsavory politicians. Corruption, inequality, and other social vices make people across the world to give up on institutions and government that are supposedly democratic. In fact, rising inequality has become the trend across Africa and the world today. This has left the least educated and the weakest of our society, the youth, very, very vulnerable and distrustful of the system. As a result of this demographic imbalance, the young people consistently clamor for change, and sometimes, unfortunately, utilize violence as a means to seek change. Unless we build and consolidate institutions of the state, like former US President Barack Obama said, instead of seeking strong men, I can guarantee you that we will not have a peaceful and prosperous African society. With the dawn of a new dispensation of democracy in my country, we are beginning to see a paradigm shift. Laws which are regarded as anti-democratic are being reformed, or in some instances, completely scrapped off the books. Amongst the first legislation that President Weah submitted to the Liberian legislature when he took office was a bill to decriminalize speech offenses. This preceded by the signing of the historic Table Mountain Declaration by our former president, Ellen Johnson Sirleaf, which Liberia committed to upholding freedom of speech. The president's desire was to strengthen one of the fundamental institutions that is integral to the very foundation of our democracy, the press. That law, which had been on the books for several generations, had allowed for the arbitrary jailing of journalists for what authorities at the time referred to as criminal libel and criminal malevolence against the president. In other words, this law gave authorities the free hand to trump up charges against reporters once they decided they didn't like a news story. Our new law, which is now being debated at the legislature, sends a notice to all that no journalist should be jailed just for being a journalist. Like one famous writer said, journalism and democracy are two names for the same thing. In fact, a free and unfettered press is an indispensable requirement for democracy. This is why we must ensure that the press itself is not used as instruments for the furtherance of selfish and parochial political interests at the expense of the greater good of the society as a whole. For more than a decade now, the culture of free speech and free expression has flourished in Liberia. The lack of democratic outlets is usually the cause for breakdown of law and order, and in worst cases, the cause for war and destruction. And Liberia has had its fair share of war. There are various explanations for the outbreak of the civil war in Liberia that killed more than 200,000 of my compatriots. Some historians believe that the abuse of power, a corrupt political system, and huge economic disparities are amongst the paramount reasons. Often described as the oldest independent country on the continent, Liberia was founded by free slaves. The so-called Americo-Liberians constituted less than 2% of the country's population. But in the 19th century and in the early 20th century, they made up 100% of eligible voters, disenfranchising everybody else. For over 100 years since its formation, up to 1980, the Americo-Liberian hegemony dominated Liberian politics. This was essentially a one-party state. The hegemony was overthrown in a violent coup that was greeted as liberation from minority domination until the new governors soon proved themselves no better than their predecessors. They too began to clamp down on the opposition and on the freedom of speech and of the press. The result was a full-blown civil war with negative repercussions for the entire West African sub-region. For more than 2 decades, our country witnessed one of the most horrific forms of violence the world had ever seen, a conflict from which Liberia is still reeling today. But a lot has changed. Liberia's institutions and human capacity that were devastated by the war are now being revived. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, we are reminded by the fact that the origins of the Liberian conflict can be traced back to various forms of exclusion and marginalization. This is why the current process of nation building is proceeding meticulously so as not to repeat the mistakes of the past. The surest way to achieve democracy and development is to ensure that we build strong institutions which meet the needs of the people and that we administer the affairs of state equitably and fairly. We have now embarked on a process of rebuilding and strengthening those institutions in Liberia which were left in ruins by the war. For more than a decade now, we have introduced a variety of systems to guard against corruption and ensure transparency. Anti-graft institutions, such as the Liberia Anti-Corruption Commission, the General Auditing Commission, have ensured that there are a slew of measures and standards by which public officials are governed and by which the resources of the state is protected. Such measures include declaration of assets by all public officials, new public financial management laws, new procurement laws, all aimed at enhancing transparency and ensuring that the national wealth is fully utilized to the benefit of the people. Our judiciary and legislature are also being strengthened and made to act independently, a move away from the inherent all-powerful presidency. The powers of these two institutions were tested during our recent elections. The courts, in particular, were inundated by electoral cases. Aggrieved candidates this time ran to the judiciary for redress and not to the streets, nor did they use the barrel of the gun to settle differences. One political pundit put it perfectly when he said that the December 2017 landmark Supreme Court of Liberia ruling, which resolved the acrimonious disputes over the results of the first round of elections amongst various political parties, was the pinnacle of the rule of law reset for Liberia. For several weeks, we waited on tenterhooks, with many fearing that we were on the brink again of another round of violence. The country hailed the decision and the fact that the aggrieved parties sought remedies through due process of law. This was a victory for the rule of law and a manifestation of renewed faith in our judicial system. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, our government recently launched the Pro-Po Agenda for Prosperity and Development, recognizing that without development, democracy will come under strain. This strategy seeks to have an inclusive and equitable distribution of the national wealth. It lays out our priorities, including the revamping of the country's derelict infrastructure, resuscitating the economy, and also maintaining the peace. Very paramount also is ensuring that we have full transparency and accountability. This is important because without an inclusive and accountable public sector, there cannot be shared prosperity and development under our new democratic dispensation. In order to avoid the mistakes of the past, citizens must be empowered to take full control of their lives. This can only be achieved through the creation of democratic institutions that allow the practice of fundamental rights under the law, but also a system that creates an economic environment which caters to the basic needs of everyone. Policies that aid poverty reduction must be engendered, as extreme poverty anywhere is a threat to democracy everywhere. As a result of the continuous ebbing away at some of the challenges which confronted Liberia, the World Democracy Rating in 2018 gave us some high marks. The index shows that the quality of our democracy improved last year under the new government of President Weah. It places Liberia at 14th place out of 36 countries in the Sub-Saharan region. But there is still a lot more to be done, to which we are committed. Our president also recently signed into law a new legislation which seeks to actualize the national policy of decentralization of local governance. This act of decentralization establishes strong democratic and administrative structures at the local level. Very important to ensure that the people at the local level, the vast majority of our people, also have a say in determining who will lead them at the local level, in their towns, in their villages, in their counties. If democracy is not structured in a way that prohibits the government from excluding people from direct ownership over the way they are governed, it allows the governance to accumulate too many powers. It wouldn't be long if we continue on this path that democracy will become a thing of the past. The progenitors of modern democracy were right when they described it as a rule by the people. Our country, Liberia, has experienced the various forms of governance, from an oligarchic hegemony to a brutal military dictatorship, from governments of warring factions to ones freely chosen by the people. Our collective experiences as a people have led us to the firm conviction that in spite of its own weaknesses and flaws, democracy still remains the best form of governance. Therefore, instead of shunning democracy because it still has not yet delivered our people from the yoke of poverty, ignorance, and disease, we must improve it by strengthening not just the institutions of government, but also the watchdogs and mirrors of the society, the media and civil society, because they too play a critical role in the democratic process. Actually, they are the real pillars of democracy. Without a strong civil society and a strong mass media, democracy cannot prosper, and therefore the people cannot benefit from democracy. Yet, with all of its imperfections, democracy works for the people if the imperatives of good governance are inculcated into the national fabric. Ladies and gentlemen, thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you again, the representative of His Excellency, the President of Liberia, Mr. George Weah, in the person of the Minister of Information, Cultural Affairs, and Tourism, Honorable Eugene Nagbe. One more time, a round of applause for him. And just a few things I did take away from, I would say, the Liberian example. It's very interesting to hear that the President has signed a bill for the decentralization of local government. We've continuously, for the past 4 or 5 years, had heightened and heated conversations about decentralizing power in Nigeria, giving more power back to the local government, and in some cases, people are saying in regional aspects. But this is another African country with a history that closely, very, very closely mirrors our own, that is taking the steps. So there are many things that we can learn from what is happening in Liberia. And while we still regard ourselves as the giants of Africa and the big brother of Africa, we need to look at what some of our younger siblings and some of the other countries around us are doing that is helping to ground democracy in their countries. Now, he also talked about the fact that democracy is imperfect. It is. We all know it is. Sometimes democracy becomes a situation of the choices of the majority, which sometimes may not be the wisest of choices. But in its imperfections, democracy is still the best for the people. And I think later on, we'll take a poll, we'll take a temperature and see how the room feels about whether or not democracy has truly brought a better life to Nigerians and to people in Africa. But I do want us to remember that while media works, the CSOs work, the governments work, democracy does not work if citizens are not active and involved. And I think it's also very important for us to remember that elections are the lowest hanging fruit. Our role as citizens do not end when we go to the polls and vote. That's actually when the hard work begins. The issues of accountability and transparency and making sure that those who have come out for our votes and have gotten our votes continue to uphold the promises that they've made, and we continue to be involved. So it's not just about elections. The hard work is after we vote. So ladies and gentlemen, as we continue on with the 16th CVL Annual Lecture and International Leadership Symposium, it's my pleasure to give you a quick background of our next speaker. Bishop Matthew Hassan Kuka was born August 31st, 1952 in Kaduna State. He was ordained a Catholic priest on December 19th, 1976. He also attended the University of Ibadan, where he obtained a diploma in religious studies, further receiving a Bachelor of Divinity at the Pontifical University in Rome in 1976, followed by a master's degree in peace studies at the University of Bradford in the United Kingdom. His academic pursuits culminated with a PhD from the University of London's School of Oriental and African Studies in 1990. He is the current bishop of the Roman Catholic Diocese of Sokoto, and between 1999 and 2001, he served as a member of the Nigerian Investigation Commission of the Human Rights Violation. In addition to his work as a parish priest of St. Andrew's Parish in Kaduna from 2004 until his nomination as a bishop, he was the secretary of the National Political Reform Conference 2005, and from 2005 onwards, he has been serving as the chairman of the Ogoni Shell Reconciliation. Please, ladies and gentlemen, I think this is another gentleman giving his time and, of course, his thoughts on the conversation of today. He deserves a round of applause. As well, if we can, a standing ovation. Bishop Matthew Hassan Kuka.
Good morning, sir. Thank you very much. Please, thank you. I like the bit about leaders without, what is the word again? So that means the opposite is titled without leadership, whatever. But anyway, Chairman General Gawon, you know, if I were to get a 100 naira for every time I've had to encounter General Gawon, I would by now be a millionaire. But as always, it's really a great pleasure. And I'm really, truly very happy to hear General Gawon come slightly closer. He's not there yet to some of the things his wife and I tried to conspire, namely to persuade him to write a biography. I remember when I was talking about it, the wife was behind, she was nodding. But thank you very much. Again, you know, it suggests very clearly the benefits of experience and age. Sometimes when you listen to people for just 5 minutes, it's better than reading 10 books of political theory. General, sir, Dr. Padutomi, well, let me, as we say, stand on existing protocol. I'm standing on existing protocol, and as you can see, I'm still not taller than, despite the support of protocols. I think the first lecture I remember I delivered had to do with Patutomi. What birthday? Is it 40? No, I don't think so. 40th. So you see, I've always responded to him because if I don't, it will amount to child abuse. You know, he's a much younger person. So I try my best to hold the hand of my younger brother. But he's... I don't want to, but I think I might say it. You know, he's an incredible human being, really incredible. I feeling a bit sleepy because at 1 p.m. yesterday I was in Vienna rounding up a meeting. We finished at 1:30, and then I left for the airport at 2, got to London. So I just arrived this morning. I managed to catch a 7:30 flight. I have to actually go back to Abuja because President Salif Johnson is in Abuja to see the Peace Committee at about 6 p.m. So I was actually hoping that President George Weah would be here. So at least let me make an open declaration. I'm not a supporter of Barcelona. the team he played for. The football team I support in the Spanish league is actually Atletico Madrid. But I want to thank you because the letter that was written to me actually read like a paper. And let me just take a few lines. It says, we are particularly motivated in inviting you following the statement made in Accra, Ghana by President Barack Obama on his first visit to Africa as president, that what Africa needs is strong institutions and not strong men. First of all, I was too angry to listen to what Obama said. The simple reason that he didn't come to Nigeria. But I could understand why he went to Ghana to make the speech. And if you look at the history, Ghana has done, as far as the American connection is concerned, Ghana has done pretty well. The Americans showed a lot of interest in Ghana. In 1957, at their independence, unknown to many of us, among other people, Martin Luther King was there in Accra and spoke quite eloquently. And one of the things he said, in God is our trust. Sorry, no, this is not. I will come to it, but he was there, and he was struck by the idea of the freedom of the independence of Ghana and its implications for Africa. Another significant development is the contribution of the first black man to be in the Supreme Court of the United States of America, the great Thurgood Marshall, who, for those of you who might know, actually helped to draft the Constitution of Ghana. You remember also the special Shirley Temple was ambassador to Ghana. So I think I make the point that I can understand contextually why Obama will go to Ghana to make the speech that he had to make. However, I had some, then as now, some very serious theoretical disagreement with Obama's statement. Well, first of all, it was a long speech. I don't think many of us have read the speech. The speech was really not about institutions and strong men. But that's the only line that we've held on to tenaciously. But if you read it in a wider context, it addresses a range of, it's rather a pretty long speech. But I think that the context of institutions and strong men doesn't say anything about strong women, unfortunately. It is assumed. You know, when President Thatcher was prime minister, he said she went to visit a constituency. She went to address women. And the women were carrying, to welcome her, they carried a placard, Mrs. Thatcher, our man. So I'm sure you understand why we're focusing only on strong men. But I think, first of all, we must understand that we are not left with a binary choice of either or. You either have strong men or strong institutions. My argument, preliminary argument, and I would like to say three things. The first is this interrogation. The second is the whole question of whether democracy works. And the third is what really we need to do. And I think most of what needs to be said has actually been said most eloquently by the future president of Liberia. You got this job because you seem to look like George Weah himself. So please learn well. But America itself, this is the great contradiction in American history. So when Obama makes this statement, he forgets that America itself was a state founded on violence. Right? America, the white settlers had to kill the Indians and take over their land. And America has consistently been at war. Now, America was built on the shoulder of strong men, who also went on to build strong institutions. And the defense of those institutions remains then as now the ideological rationale for America's interventions around the world. But also, we must not forget that it was America that institutionalized slavery. They also, by extension, institutionalize white supremacy. They institutionalize the culture of the strong man. And really, it's, you know, when you listen, you see some of the soft things that happen in America. It will be Jimmy Carter, you know, it will be Obama himself, and you see the way that America reacted to Obamacare. So I make the point that America is probably not the best advertisement for the distinction between strong men and institutions, because the idea of strong men still persists. And in Hollywood, the image of John Wayne, of Reagan himself, the quintessential cowboy, and up till today, Rambo, suggests very clearly that in America, there's really no place for weak people. So America, of course, has been an exporter of violence. Let me put it that way, to consolidate what they believe are their fundamental beliefs. And as you can hear, they're leading the charge in Venezuela. Therefore, and it's important, the American national anthem, the last 4 lines said, "Then conquer we must when our cause if just, and this be our motto, in God is our trust. And the star-spangled banner in triumph we shall wave over the land of the free and home of the brave." So America has always been, then as now, the country of strong men. What does that say? It therefore does not negate the fact that strong men can use their strength to build strong institutions. So I think that what our tragedy should not be to lament over the choice between strong men and strong institutions. It is that we had a lot of strong men. What did they use their energy for? Well, I think that really, for me, is the issue. Because as America itself realized, building the institutions is not enough. You have to have the energy, in metaphorical terms, one way or the other, to defend these institutions. So in my view, our challenge is not so much a choice between strong men and strong institutions. It is indeed, but the choice, it is that both choices are not necessarily, in the final analysis, mutually exclusive. Because guess what? Indeed, Obama himself is a beneficiary of something that is akin to the fight between David and Goliath. In the sense that America has presented the world with a certain level of certainty. And that whether it's Trumpism or whatever, America will override those things. And I think really, the real challenge and the real test in institutions is not necessarily how effective they are, but whether they can rise up to a challenge when the challenges come. Now, the notion of audacity, which underpins, and I think is a very, very fundamental statement. You know, when Obama spoke about, you know, the title of his book, but the one I'm most impressed by is the book written by his director of campaign, David Plouffe, titled The Audacity to Win. Because it also suggests very clearly that when a country has built institutions, whether it has strong men or strong women or not, the resilience of those institutions, as our brother from Senegal, Liberia said, very that, and in the final analysis, this is the beauty of, because the beauty of democracy is actually in the intangibles. They're not the things you can feel. But the notion that a poor man, a poor boy, the son of poor boys, can come from the backwaters of Liberia to the presidency, that possibility alone is what is very important. And as long as a country maintains that possibility, now, we don't know whether Nigeria will win the World Cup. But the very fact that there is a feeling that if you work very hard, the opportunity is there. That is what sustains democracy. Now, but what is even more interesting is a book I read about the middle of last year. And I think this is where the debate about strong institutions and strong men terminates, which is that there is a new kid on the block. Namely, Moses Nem published a book, and I'm sure many of you hear about it. He said, The End of Power. It talks about ballrooms and churches, but the subtitle, Why Being Isn't What It Used to Be. That is that power as we understand it It's no longer, it's literally dead and gone. Because Moyes argues that power is actually decay. All right? It's slipping away because it is so slippery and so elusive. But power is also mutating. And it's no longer about brawn, not about strength. So we have to rethink. So, yes, he's president of 2 billion people because all of us, including myself standing here, all of us. So I make the point because it takes me to the second point. But really the point I'm making is that institutions, strong men, all those are important, become redundant. And that in the final analysis, it is here, it is the brains. And you can see one of the very interesting things is to look at all these little children. All these mothers and fathers, they go and buy these phones. But it's only the 5-year-old, 6-year-old children who know what to do with the phone. No, so? Yeah? So the world is changing, and that, therefore, the question then is, why democracy? And again, in your letter, you said, you further stated, several years down the line, the hopes of reformed and democratic Africa seem to be waning, as electoral processes in Africa are marred with diverse problems. This is your letter to me. While there has been appreciable progress in moving away from armed conflict in some African countries, many African governments remain largely inefficient, less than transparent, and characterized by weak institutions. A lot of people still remain in poverty, among other basic socio-political and economic ills, with incumbents increasingly becoming adept at winning at the polls through manipulation. The question being asked by many people is, what are the prospects of real democracy in Africa? That's your letter. People, not only are people determined to win at all costs. You know, it was said of an African dictator that when the presidential elections ended, so the chairman of their local INEC rushed to the president and said, President, I'm really happy, sir. You've won 99% of the votes. President was still sitting on his desk writing. He said, sir, you won by 99%. President looked up. Said, go and find the bastard 1% that didn't vote and let me know why they didn't vote for me. So, you know, that now people in the opposition, they don't even, the idea that it's a fair competition is literally out of the question. So it's graphic. But let's not forget, we are making progress. And one of the problems with us is that I don't think we actually sufficiently appreciate how much progress we are making. Even the very fact that things that we took for granted yesterday, we no longer take for granted. Now, I think the lady, the compare, made a very interesting point. And you said about elections, because tomorrow I'll be speaking in Abuja about elections and violence. But in 1977, not too long ago, there were 89 countries which were under autocratic rule. 89 countries in Africa and parts of the world. But by 2011, the number had come down to only 22. Today, I think we are proud to say that in Africa, everybody has woken up to the fact that whether you agree with, whether you know how to spell democracy or not, you must pretend to be democratic. So everybody, for me, that is progress. You know, Kamuzu Banda, before in the 80s, when they told him that the opposition is coming back, that they are coming back, people from his country who have been in exile are coming back home. He said, let them come. Let them come. I'll give them a fair trial and hang all of them. Now, I'll give them a fair hearing, and I will still hang all of them. Now, imagine that things have changed so much that everybody is now at least pretending to be a Democrat. And they are going through the routine of election. Softly, softly, we'll go catch monkey. Then we must not become so despondent as to say, our elections free? Are they really fair? No. Somebody went to monitor elections in Ghana. I've forgotten which elections those were. And one of the international observers, they were asking people, BBC did a program. But the only thing I remember was one of them. They asked him how, the elections were fair. And we always watch for process. Are people standing on the line? Yes. Did anybody fight? No. And so, you know, INEC delivered materials in good time. Yes. We finished our voting by 2 p.m. Wonderful. So what? Now, so when they asked this guy, he said, yes, the elections were free, they were fair. So they asked one particular observer. He said, the elections were free, they were fair, but they were not free from fear. So, but you know, the question, so the point I'm making therefore is that we can see that everybody is heading in that direction. And like I always say, let's be patient. In many cases, biology will help us. You know, many of these people, spoilers, they are in their 80s, soon be in their 80s. So you are not. You see, I don't know why you are laughing, because I didn't say anything. Now, but you see, ask yourself, no, seriously, now ask yourself, which of these retired people who have finished government, how many of them have you seen invited to go and give a talk anywhere in Nigeria? No, seriously. Seriously. I looked at the names, sir, of the 71 generals yesterday, which was in the papers. The 71 generals in solidarity. And I didn't see your name. But no, the point I'm making is that we will do our best. Now, you see, in Algeria, for example, look, you know, sometimes if you lose your finger and you are crying, and you turn around the corner and see somebody who has lost 3 fingers, he won't give you back your 1 finger, but he say, oh God, I thank God I'm not like this man. Do you know, in Algeria today, Bouteflika became president in 1999. Even though that was democratic in terms of the democratic elections. But remember that in 1993, which was the year that Babangida stepped aside, Abi, that was the year that FIS, the Islamic group, nearly won the elections and the military stepped in. And then Bouteflika finally held the fort for a while and finally became democratically elected in 1999. Since then, we have had Babangida, we've had Onikan, we've had Abdul Salam, we've had Abacha, we've had you people are disrupting me. Okay, allow me to finish. We've had Abacha, we've had Abacha, we've had Abdul Salam, we've had Obasanjo, Maktu, we've had Yarad, we've had Yaradua, we've had Jonathan, we have Buhari, Maktu. Now, and despite all this, I don't know whether we are happier than the people of Algeria, but up till today, Bouteflika is still the presidential candidate after 20 years. And guess what? The last election, people campaigned without seeing him because he has been on a wheelchair for God knows how many. And even this one, the people have said he's going to run, although they can't find him, but he's going to run. So I'm just saying that gradually, because there is something about the waves of democracy. And like you very rightly said, there is something to be said in favor of age and mentoring. It's just that, you know, the worry I have with many Nigerians, everybody thinks that political participation is standing for elections. And one of the things that I thought President Weah did very well was, because the critical question is, what do you do after you lose? Very often, many of us spend too much time lamenting. But the young man, let me call him that because I'm far older than him, went, retooled himself, did some reflection, improved on himself, and came back better prepared. So the challenge for young people is, yes, it will take time. But meanwhile, use the opportunity to learn about your country. Now, there is a lot of cynicism. But the critical question about whether democracy is working for us is, who brought the democracy? Again, the lady made the point. I think and the point that the way I put it in my paper is, was democracy born naturally or by artificial insemination? Because it doesn't change, I mean, it doesn't make the baby less beautiful, but it also means certain things. Because the question we ask is, people think, oh, the West brought democracy to us and so on and so forth. But the truth of the matter is that democracy is an instinct. It may have been framed in a different way. But each and every one of us at birth understands what democracy is. Not in terms of the textbook, but in terms of the reflexes, the nuances. Therefore, in our own case, when we go back to Africa, we ask ourselves, you know, people think that transition is a science of its own in political science. Transitions, we think that transition from dictatorship is logically transition to democracy. Wrong. It doesn't work that way. Because as you can see, we have had transitions. For all these years now, we thought that the soldiers have tried their best, and we really thank them. But as you can see, the soldiers are still prepared to reproduce themselves, and they're not about going anywhere. That suggests very clearly that we must be modest in measuring how much progress we expect to make. And like I said, President Buhari, General Obasanjo, they're not bad people. They're good people. But the problem is the military reflex doesn't allow you, and it's not because people are good, but no. It's that if I became president of Nigeria today, I probably see the table as an altar. I probably think everybody should be. And like I said to people who say to me, look, why don't you contest for office? I said, look, if you make me governor today, the first meeting of the State Executive Council, we begin with prayer. And then after prayer, I begin to tell you how, in the name of God, we are going to stand for judgment. Therefore, let us please be sure that we serve the people, we make the sacrifices. Nobody is going to buy a new car until every person in this state is smiling. After they tell me, Father, this is not church, it is politics. It's not church, politics. So many of us, when we are spectators, everything looks easy. But the point I'm making is, if you look across Africa, let us be modest in our expectations. Because we have really not covered the kind of ground we need to cover. Because what you see is that in those countries where Africans fought for independence or fought for democracy, you see the result, as in Zimbabwe, as in South Africa. Compare Uganda, compare Rwanda, DRC, Eritrea, Algeria, and then Nigeria. You will see that as in Uganda, as in Rwanda, as in DRC, as in Zimbabwe, those who led the struggle believe that they've appropriated all the tools of power. And that is why Mugabe believed that he was going to stay until he dropped. That is why Museveni does not believe, yes, they can go through the formalities of election, but they don't expect to lose an election. And Rwanda, again, people forget. Everybody speaks about Rwanda with punctuation mark. It's wonderful, beautiful country, peaceful country. Democracy was not meant to be about infrastructure. This is the big mistake Nigerians make. And I hear these governors who say they call people, they take pages on newspapers, they show road, although you cannot tell the distance of a road by looking at the photograph. But they tell you, oh, this is the number of roads we have constructed. And my friend Pat Toby said something. He's more cynical than I am. He said, I don't know whether I remember. He said, you know, if you see two Nigerians talking, one man said, oh boy, our governor has done 50 kilometers of road in the last 4 years. His friend will say, 50 kilometers, Ke? Where we see 10 kilometers. So, you know, the comparison, but people are showing all the work they are doing, all the structure. And I said, these guys don't understand what democracy is. Because if democracy were just about highways and buildings and so on, and guess what? You know, if you happen to come from villages, as you are driving in Nigeria, you notice that all the beautiful primary schools are by the roadside. Even when they decide to repaint them, so when you are driving past, you say, hey, wow, this state, come and see how governor they work. Until you enter inside and discover the schools inside have nothing. But the point I'm making is I'm not against infrastructure. We have none, and we commend those who are giving us infrastructure. But for me, the most important infrastructure is the infrastructure of the brain. Because if it were just If it were just about elections, then please don't forget. In fact, when I went to the United Nations office in Geneva, somebody took me around and he told me that when they were putting up the building, I don't know whether it's anecdotal. He said, but he was a white man, a white German. He said, look, that when they were building this place, Hitler came late, and to punish him, because it was contribution from different nations, he said he decided to punish the Germans by asking Hitler to go and build the toilets. And the man said to me, I didn't go to the toilets, but he said to me, we have changed almost everything in these buildings except the toilets. That's the quality of work that. So the quality of infrastructure that Hitler left behind in Germany is impossible to surpass. And those of you who prefer to go south for your holidays and go to South Africa, all the roads, most of the roads you see, the ones that are still standing gidigba, they are the ones who were constructed under apartheid. So there is no correlation between democracy and fiscal infrastructure. The beauty of democracy is that it allows the mind. It opens up frontiers for imagination. I can dream. And this is the beautiful thing about America. Obama suggests and shows us very clearly that you can dream. Of course, nobody expects that there will be another black president very soon. But the very fact that it happened at all. So the beauty of democracy is the possibilities that lies ahead. Now, the next point I want to make, and by way of conclusion, is to look at the whole question of, has democracy delivered for us in Africa? Please let us not forget. If you didn't, I bought the last edition of Time magazine for last year. The last edition of The Economist of London. Let me tell you, read out something for you. Edward Felsenthal, he's the editor of Time magazine. He said, and I quote, democracy around the world faces its biggest crisis in decades. Its foundations undermined by invective from on high and toxins from below, by new technologies that power ancient impulses, a poisonous cocktail of strong men and weakening institutions. End of quote. There is a column in the Economist of London called Budget, and the writer said, the British system is full of maladies and is governed by a self-involved clique that rewards group membership above competence and self-confidence above expertise. It's the economy. The last edition of The Economist, the last edition of Time magazine. These are supposed to be the bastions of democracy for us. Does it make you feel happy because you lost a finger, somebody else is losing? So it is that really, I'm not saying we shouldn't be very hopeful, but to understand that democracy was not supposed to make us so comfortable and happy. It more or less is akin to marriage. Right? Like I said to men, all these men, when they are writing to their girlfriend, they say, I will swim the highest, the deepest ocean. I'll climb the highest mountain. After marriage has taken place, go to market is a problem. So it's not, but does that mean marriage is not beautiful? No, it isn't. It's just that the problems will be there. The capacity to manage the problems is what keeps us together. It's what keeps me in the priesthood, it's what keeps you married, and so on. So for me, the greatest challenge for us is how do we manage sometimes what political scientists in the 60s talked about, rising expectations. Sometimes we expect life to change. And like again, the lady said, it is not something that is going to happen deus ex machina. We have to work on it. Before democracy, of course, let's not forget, we had autocracy, we had aristocracy, we had oligarchy, we had plutocracy. We had all kinds of systems of government. And of course, we had divine right of kings. And today, as you can see, in this country, I mean, it's troubling how the spiral of feudalism is rising and rising and rising pari passu with the claims of democracy. And all the principles of democracy, because it's just a measure of whether we are really democratic or whether we are feudal. And the truth of the matter is that, like Churchill said, there are other forms of government. But please, let's not forget why democracy became so important. The First World War, over 10 million people lost their lives. The Second World War, 100 million people lost their lives. Then, the leaders of the world realized a few Africans died white water, but this is white people killing white people. They saw a certain part of the human persona that was totally unacceptable. And if you go back and read the principles of the United Nations Human Rights Declaration, which really is the frame to hold the claims of democracy. Essentially, it is freedom. Again, this is what, again, it draws very, very substantially from Abraham Lincoln's Gettysburg speech, which, as you know, is a very short speech, which Abraham Lincoln delivered on the 19th of November, 1863. Now, it formed the backdrop for Martin Luther King's I Have a Dream speech. Because in that speech, only 300 words, Abraham Lincoln said, and I quote just a little bit of it, 7 years ago, our fathers brought forth in this a new nation conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. It is only democracy that makes that possibility, that all of us are created equal. Doesn't matter your status. Contrast that with feudalism and all the systems that the world fought to create a better society. Because if you subscribe to theocracy, it means that you were appointed by God and nobody can ask a question. If you want to live under plutocracy, it means only the people in Victoria Island and Ikoyi and the extension, they are the ones who will rule. That's why Fela used to talk about, and I noticed his son and his daughter, I've heard them say, Ikoyi people. When they talk of it, that is the yardstick for measuring, the distance. But it is that there are other forms of government. And that's why Churchill said, democracy is the worst form of government except for others. Because others have been tested, but none has survived and has been as resilient as democracy. So Abraham Lincoln said, now, we are engaged in a civil war, testing whether that nation or any nation so conceived and so dedicated can long endure, that we hear that these dead shall not have died in vain, and that this nation under God shall have a new birth of freedom, and that the government of the people, by the people, for the people, shall not perish from the earth. So, the challenge of handing the baton of democracy to the next generation, we're not talking here about electing office, we're not talking here about presidents, we're not talking about, no, not only one person can be president. But we're talking about, and this for me is the danger. If you want to hire a driver, okay, Oga, we were, when I was a young priest in Kaduna, we were in the cathedral, so we fired a security man. So we wanted to hire another one. 3 of them showed up. So I was on the interview panel, we were asking. The 2 did very, then this man finally came. He looked a little bit tipsy. So we asked him, have you done this work before? He said, yes, sir. How many? He said, 2 years. Where and where? He said, 2 places. So, why did you, he said, the other man, Kai, they worry me. I said, okay, what of this other man? He said, oh God, the man, they 2 wake me up. This is a security man. He's complaining that he left his job because he's supposed to be awake while Oga is sleeping. So we said, no, this is not a candidate. But I'm saying, and listen very carefully, if you want to hire a driver, you ask questions. If you want to hire a teacher, you ask questions. Somebody comes wearing beautiful uniforms and says he's a pilot, you have to ask him to show it's not the uniform. The only thing that you don't need any qualification for is politics. No qualification. Nobody will ask you, where did you practice? And this is why, for me, there is a difference between good people doing bad things and bad people just deliberately doing bad things. And what we have in Nigeria, and I'm lucky that I have met quite a good number of people, extraordinarily good people, decent people. I can tell you, cross my heart, I know that. But too many bad things are happening under their care. Why? Because you don't get a sense that people have studied, they have reflected, they have thought about what they want to do with them. And this is why you find that many of these people who spend a long time in prison always have a way of coming back a little bit better refined. And it's one of the ways of understanding Mandela. I'm not saying everybody should go to prison, but I'm saying, now, there is, in Vienna yesterday, somebody asked me a question. He said, he's an Indian. He said, I'm coming to Nigeria. Do you know a place where they have a place for silence? Eh? Silence in Nigeria. But I'm a Catholic priest, so I have to answer correctly. I know that we make noise, but there are parts of the Catholic Church has monasteries. So I told him we have monasteries. So when he comes, he says he wants to go and spend 5 days. One of the best scientists in the world, I've forgotten his name again. He said, Jewish, I don't remember his name. Somebody, Harry. But he says every year, he goes away for 1 full month with nothing. No member of his family, and just stays for 1 full month, saying nothing, doing nothing, thinking of nothing. In England, one of my friends came and invited me that there are one monastery. You can go there for 2 days of silence, 3 days of silence. So my friend said, why don't we go for 3 days? I said, okay, let's start with 2 hours for me. I don't, But, what happens, and I'm sorry, I'm going to end very soon. What happens is that, and if you see a Nigerian, I don't know how it is in your place, but if you see a Nigerian president or public official, I feel sorry for these people. Because as you are waiting, the man is stepping out in the morning. There are already people in dark glasses, suits, and so on waiting. These guys will follow you everywhere you go until you say good night and you are closing your door. The next morning, they arrive. There is funeral, there is wedding, this. So you ask, where will somebody find time to reflect about the problems of our country? So I make the point because, and this is where I want to end, is that the famous August 28, 1983, 63 speech of Martin Luther King. I don't know whether some of you, please, it's a speech that even now when I read it, my eyes almost go wet. I spent most of last month just reading a collection of Martin Luther King's speeches. It's incredible to think about a man of such intelligence at that very tender age. But one of the things all through his life, all through his speeches, he is appealing to the conscience of America, living under this terribly oppressive system. But he never resorted to violence. Now, when you go back to the speech, I just took part of it. It says, 100 years later, because Abraham Lincoln's speech was in 1863, he is speaking in 1963, 100 years later. And then a lot of the speech draws from the U.S. Declaration. But he also confronts America with the Constitution, confronts America with the Declaration of Independence and the Gettysburg speech. And he says, 100 years later, the life of the Negro is still sadly crippled by the manacles of segregation and the chains of discrimination. 100 years later, the Negro lives on a lonely island of poverty in the midst of the vast ocean of material prosperity. 100 years later, the Negro is still languishing in the corners of American society and finds himself in exile in his own land. Now, I'm sure many of you, if you've been to Washington, you know where the Lincoln Memorial is. Martin Luther King, they chose deliberately where to deliver this speech. Sometimes it's not what you say, it's where you say it. Now, if you've been to Washington, I've been to the Washington Memorial, you see the old man sitting there. And Martin Luther King is literally saying, re-echoing, you are our witness. Then he says, and so we have come here today. We have come here today to dramatize our condition. We black people have come here today. This is what America promised us. This is what the Constitution of America promised us. But we black people are still living in little islands of frustration. The Constitution and Declaration of Independence, they were signing, those who signed it, they were signing a promissory note to which every American will fall heir. That is, everybody being an American will inherit all this. Go back and read the Nigerian Constitution, chapter 2. You think you are reading the Catholic Catechism in terms of the promises. This note was a promise that all men, yes, black men as well as white men, should be guaranteed the unalienable rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. It is obvious today that America has defaulted on this promissory note insofar as her citizens of color are concerned. Instead of honoring this sacred obligation, America has given the Negro a bad check. Okay? America has given the Negro a bad check. A check which has come back marked insufficient funds. That's what he said. You gave us a check. We as black people have taken the check because all the promises these politicians are making, is that it's supposed to be a check. But tomorrow go and try cashing any of them. Okay, you promise us this. Oh, you say, you know not saying a campaign. Did you expect to be taken? This is politics. Martin Luther King says the check has come back marked insufficient funds. But, and this is the part I like. He says, but we refuse to believe that the Bank of Justice can be bankrupt. We refuse to believe that the Bank of Justice can be bankrupt. Now, I meet a lot of people who say to me, you know, those who don't like me, and there are many, they say, you know, you've just left your job, you're a politician, following politicians. I say, my dear, if you are a Catholic priest, or if you are really a Christian in position of authority, and you know what this country has, and you can sleep peacefully, then something is wrong. I'm a very privileged Nigerian. Very, very privileged. Very privileged. I don't know when I bought a suit last. People buy clothes for me. They buy shoes for me. So I'm a very privileged Nigerian. If I kept my mouth shut, I'll be, you know, people think that somehow there must be, when you do all this, there must be something to do with money. But really, can you live in a country so enormously endowed, with so much crippling and unacceptable inequalities, and you think that somehow there's nothing we can do? Because we have to refuse to believe that the Bank of Justice is bankrupt. So we're talking about paying workers 30,000 naira. Say we cannot pay. Cannot pay. How much does it take to celebrate the birthday of a girlfriend of somebody's wife who is in big office? Really, I mean, these are very serious moral issues. Is there a senior government official, anybody with authority and power, that can send 30,000 naira to his son or daughter on their birthday at the end of a month? So we refuse to believe that there are insufficient funds in the great vaults of opportunity of this nation. And so we have come to cash this check, a check that will give us upon demand the riches and freedom of justice. So I want to end, first of all, by thanking you, but to appeal to you. The journey is long, not where we were last year. One of the things I said not long ago, to take a quotation from the book of Jeremiah. And I was saying, on the day of election, when you go to have your bath, stand in front of your mirror, ask yourself. You know what Jeremiah said? Look at yourself and ask yourself, am I more handsome than I was last year? Am I fatter? Am I thinner? How do I look? Then you go back and go back to what Jeremiah said. It's crossroads. Look left and look right. The road that stood you in good state, that road. So we must do the best we can to build our country, but please let us never expect. Democracy is full of disappointment, and those you elect today, tomorrow they will disappoint you. But that is not to say that democracy is a disappointment. It is that we must continue, because at the end, it's a work in progress. And like one of our African scholars said, in the rendezvous of victory, there ought to be and there should be room for everybody. Thank you very much.
I do believe that this is a speech that deserves much more of an applause. We have to say a very, very big thank you to Bishop Matthew Hassan Kuka. That was an absolutely in speech. So many takeaways there, but I think also one towards the end about our own responsibility and asking questions. I took so many notes. I was tweeting about what he was saying. I don't even know where to start from. I know that each and every one of us was able to take away something from what the bishop said. So one more time, please, a round of applause for Bishop Matthew Hassan Kuka. Just a little bit of an amendment to the program, but we'll continue to move things on. We will be calling up our panelists and our moderator right before we have reflection on democracy, private enterprise development, and national competitiveness in Africa. I did mention the panelists were around earlier, but this is a very fantastic opportunity to introduce you to the gentleman and a lady that will spend a few minutes on stage sharing their thoughts on today's theme, which is democracy making life better in Africa? So please let me start with introducing our very first panelist. We have Professor Ibidapo Obe. He was born July 5th, 1949 at Ile-Ife, Osun State in Nigeria. He received a bachelor's degree in mathematics from the University of Lagos. He is a professor of systems engineering, educational administrator, as well as the former vice chancellor of the University of Lagos. Professor Ibidapo Obe is a fellow of the Africa Academy of Science and a fellow of the Academy of Sciences for the Developing World. Please, ladies and gentlemen, a round of applause for our very first panelist, Professor Ibidapo Obe. Also joining the panel, we have Dr. Muiz Banire. He was born on the 6th of October, 1966 in Lagos. He received his LLB, Masters and Doctorates of Law from the University of Lagos, focusing on the evolving alternative legal framework for land management in Nigeria. He was a senior lecturer of law at the University of Lagos from 1991 till 2010, lecturing in private and property law. He formed the United Action for Change, which serves as a pressure group and think tank with a drive to build a society where people are valued and treated equally and enjoy their rights as citizens. A round of applause for Dr. Muiz Banire. Now I'd like to call Toyosi Akerele Ogunstiji. She was named by Forbes as one of the 20 most powerful young women in Africa and is a social entrepreneur whose work is at the intersection of entrepreneurship, youth education and development, as well as public leadership. She is the founder and CEO of Rise Networks, Nigeria's leading social enterprise, whose mandate is on using tech innovation to create advocacy, skills empowerment, and learning opportunities for the inclusive growth of youth. Toyosi is an Edward Mason Fellow and has a master's in public administration from Harvard University, the Kennedy School of Government. She also studied strategic management at the executive level at Cambridge University's Judge Business School and has a certificate in youth inclusive financial services from the University of New Hampshire. She holds her certificate in media enterprise from the School of Media and Communications from Pan Atlantic University. Please, a round of applause as Toyosi Akerele Ogunshiji makes her way to the stage. Next, joining the panel, we have Mr. Emeka Izeze. He's a fellow of the Weatherhead Center for International Affairs, Harvard University, Cambridge, Massachusetts. He's also the immediate past managing director and editor-in-chief of Guardian Newspapers Limited in Nigeria. He studied business management at the prestigious Lagos Business School and also undertook leadership and development at the Kennedy School of Government at Harvard University. He was appointed editor of the Sunday edition of The Guardian in 1988, and in 1992, he became editor of the daily flagship newspaper. In 1999, he was appointed managing director and editor-in-chief of Guardian Newspapers, one of Nigeria's most respected newspapers. He is a board member of the West Africa Institute, a fellow of the 21st Century Trust England, member of NIPAD Business Group Nigeria, as well as a member of the Business Support Group. Please, ladies and gentlemen, a round of applause for Emeka Izeze. And also joining the panel, Mr. Ebere Onwe. He's a Nigerian political economist who resides in Abuja and is chairman of the O Analytics Research and Development Initiative. His undergraduate education was at the American College of Switzerland in 1979 and University of Science and Arts in 1980. He received MS and PhD in political science from Florida State University. He is currently the chairman of Board of Trustees, Leadership Institute, Port Harcourt, and is a member of the Governing Council of Igbenedion University in Okada, Edo State, and a member of the board of the Ojukwu Center, Owerri, Imo State, as well as a distinguished fellow at the Center for Democracy and Development. Please, a round of applause for Professor Ebere Onwodiwe. And moderating the session will be Professor Pat Utomi. But before that happens, we do have one more thing to do before the panel. We'll be looking at reflection on democracy, private enterprise, development, and national competitiveness in Africa. This was meant to be presented by Dr. Lazarus Anagbazo, who's the president and CEO, East, Central, and West Africa of GE International Operations Nigeria Limited. But sadly, he's not here, but he will be ably represented by Dr. Joyce Shingo Wige, Executive Director at GE. Dr. Joyce, please make your way to the podium. And right after that, the panel will kick off. Ladies and gentlemen, please a round of applause for Dr. Joyce as she makes her way. She's representing, again, Dr. Lazarus Anagbazo, who's president and CEO, East Central GE International Operations Limited. Let's give her a round of applause, please.
Your Excellency, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. Bishop Kukah is just such a hard one to follow. I'm sure you all agree with me. I mean, after Your Excellency, General Yakubu Gowon has spoken, and the Minister of Liberia has spoken, and then Bishop Kukah, I guess the organizers have a sense of humor putting me right after. Right, the topic I've been asked to talk about is democracy. Okay. Is democracy, private enterprise, development, and national competitiveness. When I was asked to talk about this topic, I took a good look at the topic, and what came to my mind was national competitiveness is an outcome, development is an outcome, a thriving private enterprise is an outcome, but democracy is the only driver. So the question is, how can this driver, democracy, drive us to get the qualified, the quality national outcomes we want? National competitiveness, development, and private ends. I'll step aside for a moment and say, everything here is exactly my opinion. There's a disclaimer. It's my opinion. It's not that of General Electric, neither is it that of Lazarus Anagbazo. So there is a famous joke that says that a mathematician, an accountant, and an economist went for an interview. And they were asked the question, what is 2 plus 2? The mathematician said 2 plus 2, of course, is 4. Right? And they said, are you sure? He says, of course, it's 4. An accountant was asked, what is 2 plus 2? And he thought for a moment, and he says, you know, it could be 4 plus or minus, right? When an economist was asked, he's asked 2 plus 2 equals, and he says, you know, it all depends on what you want to do with the equals. Right, it's not exactly the same depending on what profession you speak to. Right, for the purposes of our discussion, which is quite quick actually, we will have a look at definition. The whole idea of the definition is to be able to provide us with context, so we agree on exactly what the definition of democracy is. We'll just take examples of what some countries have done, those that have practiced the sort of democracy we practice here, and those that have adopted other forms of democracy or other forms of government, right? And then we will have a look at, now, does it actually, this democracy they've practiced, does it actually give them the natural quality outcome of development? We will have a look at what modern day refer to as indicators of development, which has to do with longevity of life, it has to do with quality of education, has to do with GDP. And to look at that, we will have a look at the Human Development Index. Now we will refer to the UNDP, and then we will have a look at, we'll take a breath from that and try to answer the question, then we will actually determine, does democracy actually lead to national competitiveness. We will also look at the ranking as provided the World Economic Forum to see if it actually does provide that answer. Then we will take a quick look, because you see most of the panelists are private sector panelists. We'll then say, does democracy actually breed a thriving private sector enterprise, quality outcome of development? We will make our deductions, and hopefully at the end of it all, we'll come to we'll try to answer the question and come to some sort of conclusion. Now, definition. Bishop Cooker actually took us to definition, which was exactly what Ambassador Abraham Lincoln said, which is democracy is government for the people, by the people, of the people. Now, it's always important to look at the history of anything, because the history gives you an indication of why did this come about. And let's not lose sight of history, because it gives us a guidance as to where we're going. So the history tells us that it's actually a Greek word. It actually started in ancient Greece, and it was a product of a response to the concentration and abuse of leadership at the time. Now, this is key because we don't want that repeating itself. So if we choose to actually have a democratic system, we must remember that the rule is we have to ensure that it doesn't repeat itself in terms of having an abused concentration of leadership. Then we will look at, now the next thing is, we talked about democracy here, and what came out when Bishop Cooker was talking is that he talked about different forms, oligarchy, aristocracy, but it might interest you to know that there's actually different variations of democracy based on ideology. So there is presidential democracy, there is authoritarian democracy, there is Islamic democracy, there is representative democracy, there is socialist democracy. All of them come under this big umbrella of democracy. But guess what the difference is? It's the ideology behind what the core value, or the core values of the people that actually make for the variation of democracy they're talking about. Now, take for example, when you talk about socialist democracy. Socialist democracy is practiced most commonly by the Nordic countries. And the Nordic countries are like Sweden, Norway, and you all know that they have the best, highest, HDI, highest ranking in competitiveness and all that. So there must be something we must learn from that, right? I mean, if they actually have their ideology instilled, ingrained in whatever the democratic principles are, it might be something we might need to look out for. Again, there is like I said, there is the authoritarian, which is practiced in countries like Qatar and China. Now let's take a look at, let's have a look at democracy and development. Democracy and development. I chose 5 examples, 5 different countries. I chose Venezuela because Venezuela has been in the news recently, right? It's supposed to be a democratic elected government, but recently we have someone from the National Assembly, Juan Guaido, that actually named himself interim president, and guess what? He's getting all over the world. I also chose Brazil. Then, for countries that don't practice the typical type of democracy, sort of variation, I chose Singapore, China, and Qatar. Now, there's no real reason or logic to choosing this, but this is generally off cuff. And for these ones, what I found out is, in looking at them, to determine whether actually, in trying to answer the question does democracy give us the actual desired outcome of development? I looked at the longevity of people that live in these particular countries. And if we look at the ranking, what we found out for Venezuela, out of a total of 229 countries, Venezuela came 116. Brazil came 129. Nigeria came 178. Singapore was number 3. Qatar was 56. China was 99. What does that tell us? So there's long expectancy in those countries than in the countries that practice the more classical form of democracy, like Nigeria, which is Venezuela, and Brazil, which is the presidential form of democracy. Now, we looked at the HDI, which is the Human Development Index, which kind of tells you, the literacy level, how human beings are doing, education, the status, and all that. And we looked at a ranking as presented by the UNDP. And what came out, again, on top was Singapore was number 9, Qatar was 37. Nigeria was number 177. Now again, we see a trend, right? That those countries that practice democracy that is slightly tweaked to their ideology seem to be coming out tops in the ranking. Now, if we're trying to answer the question, does democracy actually breed development? Now, we looked at the final one, which has to do with GDP. We all know GDP, right? GDP per capita tells us the higher it is, of course, the better economic welfare of the citizens. Again, Qatar ranked highly. Singapore, Qatar was number 1. Singapore was number 4. China went up. Nigeria was the last, with Venezuela and Brazil. So there is a common trend we're beginning to see. So if you're beginning to ask yourself, what's the link between democracy and development, you can begin to say, maybe there is a link between democracy and development. Maybe we should expect some quality outcome. But you say, you know what? Let's think about it a little bit more. Let's look at national competitiveness. You might probably say to me, Joyce, give me more facts, right? I need more facts to be able to come to that conclusion. So we looked at national competitiveness. What is national competitiveness? Some of you might ask. The national competitiveness was by the World Economic Forum, and is indexed with 12 pillars. These 12 pillars include institutions, infrastructure, microeconomic stability, health, education, higher education, financial market, technical readiness, innovation, and so many others. We looked at the ranking again, and consistently, what came out clearly was that Singapore was number 2, China followed as 28, Qatar as well, right up there. Nigeria, Brazil, and Venezuela were at the bottom. Now you might begin to think maybe there is actually a link between democracy and quality outcomes of development and national competitiveness. But before I finish up, let's look at the last one, which has to do with, does democracy guarantee a thriving private sector? Now, private sector, when you look at all of this, right, private sector varies from region to region, depending on natural resources, depending on cost of production. So a private, businessman determines where he wants to go and how he wants to do the business based on all of those labor and all of those issues. The economists will know better. But one underlying factor and one clear factor is that there is a categorical, there is no gainsaying that the quality of leadership has a direct bearing on a thriving private sector. The reason is this, and it doesn't require, it's a no-brainer. A quality leadership actually does provide the enabling environment. It makes the policies, it enforces the policies, it ensures those adequately to head the agencies. So I guess it just behoves, or it's a natural expectation that if quality leadership is key to a thriving environment, then there is a direct correlation between an enabling environment and the quality of leadership. So it brings to the forefront the fact that what sort of system do we operate that would necessarily throw out the candidates that would actually vie for these positions to kind of get us closer to the quality outcomes that we are searching for. Now, I would use this opportunity to say that, it can arguably be said that for innovation and to thrive in a system, there is an argument that could be said for restructuring. Because when you restructure, there is a tendency for the power to move away from the center and development of different regions in the country to be able to pull our resources together and bring everyone up to the top. But that is my view. Now, what's the deduction from all of this we can see? Democracy can be good, but it all depends on how you use it. What we noticed was that most African countries, we talked about Nigeria, but most African countries were like Nigeria, were huddled at the bottom of the ranking table, be it for HDI or be it for national competitiveness. But most African countries also, in looking at some of their constitutions, actually have similar constitutions like that of Nigeria, right, which is the federal system. So one thing that was clearly missing from all of this is what we saw that was applicable to those who seem to be ranking properly, which was that China, Qatar, Singapore, there was an ideology which they instilled into the democratic principles they were practicing, still calling it democracy, but giving them the desired outcome that placed their nation in a high position of national competitiveness. So it might be something we might wish to consider for our nation, Nigeria. And it just goes to buttress. There is actually a saying, says that, saying to the effect that the people without knowledge of their past history, origin, or culture are like trees without roots. So if the Singaporeans or the Qatarians or the Chinese actually did have this at the back of their mind, and they actually did remember their history and sort of inculcated it in their principles, maybe that is the way we really should be going, other than just adopting hook, line, and the Western form of democracy. I would conclude by saying that African countries, having adopted democracy, adopted it hook, line, and sinker. Now, the quality of leadership, particularly in Nigeria, as I've enshrined in our constitution, and Bishop Cook actually alluded to it, said that for you to actually hold an elected office, all that you need for qualification is that you have a certain age, 30, 35, in case of president, 40, and just have school cert. It doesn't matter how many universities have been thrown up since the Constitution was risen, but just have school cert and just belong to a political party. It gives no reference to any form of education, no reference to any form of experience, no reference to any form of taxes that you need to pay, no reference to any form of management or kiosk. You know, he talked about David in the Bible. And guess what? David was prepared for the job which God had actually asked him to do. David had been in the forest. He had actually killed a bear. He had actually had a lion. And that is why the king, I believe, kind of said, you know what? We will give you a chance. Here is my armor. Wear it. If David didn't have this history, this track history, which was known to all, I don't think they would even as much as have given him a chance. And so I think that it's not too much to actually expect this of our leadership. Again, Bishop Kuka alluded to the fact that you have a driver and you want to employ a driver. Guess what? You ask him for his track records. You have a cook, you want to know, have you done this before? Where did you do it? Your child goes to school, you want to know, you've passed to the next class, so it means that you must have completed all the requirements for education at a particular level, right? Before he gets elevated to the next class. Somehow, our constitution is completely silent on this. So if you have been home sitting down, an armed robber, whatever, you guess what? Election, you just come up and run for the election. If you're able to, muscle your way through, then you become the leader. I think there is something to say that democracy, there is a link between democracy and a thriving leadership, and a thriving private sector, and it actually behoves on the leadership to ensure that we have a system that is fair. Not just fair, but a system that is capable of throwing out fairly decent candidates that can actually vie for positions that will probably give us the desired outcome. Now, in conclusion, just one last thing to say, which is that there is actually a quote from somebody, Tom Stoppard, and he said, "It is not voting that is democracy, it's the counting." Thank you.
To speak to students at the University of Nigeria, years as a prolific thought leader, essayist, and newspaper columnist, producer and presenter of Tito's Gang, and president of the military-era Concerned Professionals. Utomi asserts that there is a need to wake Nigeria up. Concerned Professionals and other pro-democracy groups hastened the return of the military to their bases and the reclamation of democracy for Nigeria. But he recounts one recurring lamentation. Quote, "The democracy we fought for has set life up to imitate art, as it mirrors Fela Nikolako Kuti's mockery of the experience as them all crazy." Unfortunately, the concerned professionals and their ilk across the country failed to transmute into political parties leaving the space for persons who played no role in the struggle and lacked the values to propel the country forward with policies and programs based on vision. He says that is where the problem started with our current democracy. 4, the complicit middle is recommended reading. It is provocative. It laments the apathy and dysfunction of Nigeria. Study after study shows that the middle class is pivotal to growth in most societies. Natalia Chon, Rana Hassan, and Mehmet Ulubasoglu in 2011 analyzed data from 72 countries in a study for the Asian Development Bank. The role of the middle class in economic development. What do cross-country data show? And the evidence is that the middle class propels economic growth. Other studies show that the middle class does this by promoting better governance and right policy choices. Utomi says the Nigerian middle class is passive rather than active on the issues that propel societal growth and economic development. He groups under the middle class tropical gangster in politics, the tropical gangster in politics, that's his name for all of those kinds of people who are playing there, academics and intellectuals, students, religious leaders, and the business community. You must read his narrative about the business community. The business community, the author charges, quote, take over in feigned neutrality. They take cover in feigned neutrality to collaborate with whoever is in power and quietly fund them against the people's will. The business community belongs to a party called AJIP, Any Government in Power. Utomi calls for a reform in the middle class attitude, which is that attitude which sees politics as the arena for only people pursuing their narrow self-interest. This same attitude believes that politicians should be mocked, as they mocked him, poked fun at, and genuinely dismissed as having no redemptive value. The result is that the typical Nigerian youth of today feels hopeless and wants out. Why not paints on a broad canvas? The book is a major contribution to studies in Nigerian and African political science, sociology, political economy, and mass communication. Why not exemplifies Walter Fisher's narrative paradigm theory in using storytelling to good effect. Narrative paradigm states that all meaningful communication is in the form of storytelling. Experiences and other factors from the past influence the process. Why not is a coherent account with a high degree of fidelity and deploys the tools of narrative to present an account using split screen rather than linear storytelling. The book adds to the impressive corpus of works featuring the author's engagement with the Nigerian condition. Works by this renowned professor of political economy include Managing Uncertainty, Competition and Strategy in Emerging Economies, The Art of Leading, Open Secrets of Leadership Effectiveness, and Values and Leadership for Sustainable Development. Others are Gold in Thoughts, a collection of Professor Pat Utomi's views on the economy, politics, and social system, and Keeping Faith, the Making of an Icon. There are also Business Angel as a Missionary, Reflections of an Economic Growth Activist, Nigeria's Political Economy and the Courtship with Poverty, and Critical Perspectives on Nigerian Political Economy and Management. Why not should provoke, quote, debates and a marketplace of ideas, the presence of which Utomi says would serve as an antidote to the present decline in Nigeria. To escape onrushing anarchy, the book recommends Nigeria should leapfrog initiatives in education and healthcare, government focused on the people and the common good, a strategy based on dominating the value chains of factor endowments where Nigeria has an obvious latent competitive advantage, and creating citizenship culture that breeds patriots. Happy birthday, Professor Tommy.
Thank you. I guess we'll transit quickly to conversation here. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, let me begin, and I think this is appropriate here, by giving thanks to Emeka Opara, who has done remarkably well to facilitate a good part of today's program, including minding our Liberian friends. Emeka, thank you. But we're here, and I will begin with the enfant terrible himself, Dr. Muiz Banire. Really, truly, I just want us to all quickly, in 3 minutes, address the theme. Is democracy making life better in Africa? And then I'll come back with specific questions. So Dr. Banire will start. I don't want you to be linear. So I'll jump from Dr. Banire to Mr. Emeka Izeze, who actually presented a paper at Harvard on this subject only a few months ago. So we'd like him to reflect again on that, and then we'll take it from there.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Moderator. All other courses duly extended. Well, I think the topic itself enters a presumption that democracy processes to deliver some form of welfareism, which I'm not too sure that that is the correct representation of what democracy is all about. Maybe at best, we take it as a structure or a system of governance on its own. But beyond that, if we assume without conceding that democracy is supposed to engender some form of welfareism, then we must look at the other parameters that must go with it. Because you can actually have, before Africans' life can be better, or the economy or the well-being generally, certainly some other things must happen, like Bishop Kuka said. For example, I will imagine that democracy on its own will not certainly better the life of Africans, but you need good governance to deliver on that one. And for you to have good governance, certainly there must be good leaders. To have good leaders, you come back to the issue of democracy again, or the election of your leaders. Now, from the presentation by a doctor, the last speaker, you will see that democracy is not indicative of good governance. It's not synonymous with it in whatever form. She gave us an example of Qatar, for example. UAE is there, China is there, and also of others. We are, to a large extent, you will say the people are much better off than most of us in this part of the continent. And there you cannot, strictly speaking, say that they practice democracy really in the way that we conceive it here today. But if you look at the electoral democracy in Africa, maybe by the time you take off about less than 10 countries that seems to have some semblance of credible election. All others are challenged when it comes to election itself. So, and once the election is challenged, the implication is that you are not likely to have good leaders that will cater for the welfare of their people. So, in summary, at the end of the day, you are far off from being well off or from being better.
So it's really about the process, about whether the democratic process, as we practice it, results in the emergence of good leaders. But it's also about accountability and how you can hold whoever comes out of the process accountable. We probably need to engage all of this as we go down. Emeka? Yeah.
Thank you. I think as a process, I think we can agree that democracy has been making steady progress. And I think to that extent it's making some impact for the better in the lives of Africans. I'm talking generally. It's always very convenient to go continental and leave your country. It's something that Pat knows too well. And even here, we have elections regularly. We have a constitution. We, quote and unquote, subscribe to the rule of law. We protect and defend civil liberties. All these are yardsticks measuring democracy. In other words, if you want to have a society where these don't exist, the lot of the people will be worse. So to that extent, you say that in Africa, we seem to be making some progress. But Kofi Annan, it was, who once said that democracy really is not just about voting every 4 or every 5 years. It's also about how you conduct yourself, even if you were originally voted to be there. And what does it mean to the people? Look, because we're many, I take one aspect. I think that where democracy had failed us, and I mean, I'm talking of Nigeria now, it's, the same thing can be replicated all over Africa, is that we expect too much from our leaders. Father Kuka touched on that. Take President Buhari, for instance. He gave a speech, May 29, 2015. I belong to everybody, I belong to nobody. And everybody gave it a coloration that they wanted it to possess. But because it's our business to also look and add other dynamics in your analysis, we recognize that the man was saying, don't expect what you are used to having. I cannot do it, because he himself, he was supposed to bring change, but he was already a changed man. He was older in 2015 than he was in 1984. He had dropped the garb of general, which he had in 1984. Before 2015, he was no longer a general, he was now something else. And people don't understand what that means. The mentality is changing. The attitude is changing. And Nigerians were expecting change to come. And we started warning that 1 month into the tenure of the administration that we will not get everything everybody is expecting. But it wasn't politically enough for the APC or for other political people, other civil society groups to rise and moderate the expectations of Nigerians. So and it's not only he, it was exactly the same thing with Goodluck Jonathan. The first trip Goodluck Jonathan paid, the first trip he made to Lagos, he hadn't been sworn in after winning the election. People literally, no kidding, people literally queued up on both sides of the airport road, the length and breadth of that road, waiting to see Goodluck Jonathan. That's how it used to be in the old days. And I said our expectation from these Nigerians is way higher than what they're going to get. By the way, we also came to the conclusion that between the last president and the present president, there's not really much that is different. They're both outsiders to the power blocks of their regions. They're both loners. They're both people with very limited reach in the society. They're both going to depend on a small coterie of people to run the government, and they're both going to make mistakes. And you really don't need to be a genius to come to those conclusions. I think whoever wins in 10 days' time must begin to moderate our expectations so that we don't always come back 4 years on to come to this moaning condition that we haven't quite made progress. As a process, we have made progress, but is it touching people? It's not, because mostly people were expecting what they're never going to get. I will comment on some other aspects of this. Thank you.
Thank you so very much. Now, but big question, is it about process? Why should we go through a process that doesn't make our life better? What's the use of democracy if I'm worse off as a person? There are nuanced statements like came from Bishop Kuka. I don't care if I feel nice, but I'm about to die of poverty. If some nice, strong man will ensure that I live well. Isn't that what most people say? I'm trying to challenge, I'm trying to provoke. What's the point of worrying about process if we're worse off? Let me take it from a specific angle. Poor people are typically excluded. Inclusion is about getting them to be part of it. A few weeks ago, my wife and I were at a wedding, and somebody beside us was commenting. And this fellow said that at the University of Benin in the 80s, you could see the boys from the poorest families. They used to wear plastic shoes or something like that. Those boys eventually became the ones that went into government in 99, took over a state like Delta. His explanation was that Delta is so bad because their poverty mindset affected the government. My thinking is completely different. If you came from poverty, you should use power to make sure there's no more poverty. However, there is logical, theoretical explanation in law. 19th century France, Frederic Claude Bastiat, in his famous monograph, The Law, essentially argues that law is an instrument of legal plunder. You use the law to plunder. And that the worst thing that can happen to a country is for the excluded to imagine that entering power is to share in plunder rather than changing things. And what seems to have happened to Nigeria is that those who were excluded, most of the wrong people, entered in 99 and wanted to share in plunder. And Nigeria has been in free fall. Teosi, what do you think of that?
Happy birthday, Professor Patutomi. You know, this is a very controversial topic. I don't know if I want to be politically correct or if I want to say exactly how I feel, just to safeguard my own future political ambition. Is democracy making life better in Africa? I think about that in the context of development. When I think about that in the context of development, what I see in my country is the development of underdevelopment. The reason I say that is that we're such a rich country, we're such a poor people. We live in a country of deep-seated ironies where the richest man out of Africa comes from our country, but we're also the headquarters of poverty. Hello, citizens of the poverty capital of the world. Now, I feel like development doesn't need democracy. What I think that development needs is a set of well-structured, responsible institutions that are overseen by public administrators who understand transparency, dedication, commitment, and patriotism. However, the problem with Nigeria is that our public administrators have been oppressed and rigged into a system where they are supposed to submit to a retinue of rogues and criminals, such that the people that you put in the systems who are meant to do the jobs are supposed to then submit to politicians who don't think about the future. And the reason I say that is, I don't know if I want to be controversial, but if I think about the countries that have experienced incredible levels of development, they are not democracies. Europe is a monarchy. The UK, for example, is a monarchy. Forgive me, not Europe. Led by kings and queens and emperors through time. Think about Dubai, a country that at the time that Nigeria became a federation in 1960, Dubai was still a desert. It was still 7 emirates. You think about countries like Singapore. Lee Kuan Yew's records don't show him to be a Democrat. You then think about countries, come to Africa and bring it to Rwanda. Nobody would tell you that Paul Kagame is such an excellent Democrat. Take it upstairs and go to China and Germany. Those are countries that are witnessing the 4th industrial revolution already. Artificial intelligence, robotics, the Internet of Things, and people are going to school. We are living in a country where we're upholding wealth without work and politics without principle. And then you ask me as a 35-year-old if democracy is working, making lives better. I think about my country as poor people, and I think about 80 million people living below the poverty line. And I wonder if they care about the English we're speaking in this room. What I want to really see is the impact of the conversation that we're having here, and how it is going to go to the streets, so that when we vote in 10 days, we will make decisions that will not be 1,000 naira per year, which means that you pay 4,000 naira per vote. And the reason I say that is because We seem to have these standalone conversations all the time where we talk about 4,000 or 5,000 naira votes. Professor Patu told me the parts of this country where the bribe they receive in return for their votes are bathroom slippers and toothpaste. Those are communities. I sit on the Presidential Committee for the Victims of Terrorism Support Fund. And so I go to places where you don't hear about, like Askara Uba, like Buniyadi, like Michika Madagali. I was in Takum in Taraba the other day. And these are people who, when the sun hits the ground, they're walking bare feet. Those ones don't need 4,000 naira. They need bathroom slippers, and they will vote for the biggest criminal in that community. And these are the realities that face us. So when you ask me if I want a democracy, what I really want is leaders who understand what public administrative systems are. And those public administrative systems have to submit and be built into institutions that stay through time, such that you cannot begin to make a case for democracy like countries like France that became democracies in 1789, but did not begin to establish and experience stable democracies till about 1871, just almost about 100 years. Now, I will reframe the question and ask, what has democracy done for the people of my country? And then I'll come back.
Well, thank you so very much. I think it's I think a necessary follow-on is it not possible, because there are so many benefits that come from this democracy, as has come from listening to the president of Liberia, as has come from Bishop Kuka's statement, is it not possible to make the process work to produce the kinds of people who will lead like those people who have led in those countries that don't seem like bureaucracies? That's everybody. But you see,
at the end of the day, democracy presupposes that my rights are I'm supposed to be represented by people.
Sure.
However, when the people that are supposed to be representing me represent their own interests,
yeah, okay, I'll go to Professor Oye Ibidaku Obe, who has not been a Democrat. As a vice chancellor, he is an oppressor. They have such powers.
Thank you, Pat. Happy birthday. You know, as I sit down here and I listen, and I said, perhaps the problem is that the definition of democracy, which I was taught in civic class in about 1956-57, is still what is pervading. Democracy basically is about inclusion. See, that is the problem. And when democracy was actually being touted by the great American, as Bishop Kuka told us, it presumes equality, equal opportunity in terms of especially education. As long as we don't give education priority to make sure that everybody gets qualitative education in a society whereby out of 180 million, we have confirmed, it's probably more than that, that 13.5 million children, in spite of the free feeding, etc., they're out of school. You are not going to get democracy. In a society whereby in the process of governance, you don't respect merit, where you do things in terms of your tribal connections. Sometimes I ask myself, if all these great Nigerians, somebody was talking to me about Ogunlesi just this morning, if the United States of America says, you kill there, I want to pick you, I want somebody from Edo State, somebody who's been in, even within Edo State, I don't want Ishekiri, and they use that to admit us, as it were, as citizens of the United States. Do you think Nigeria, United States will be as great as this? Why is it they are not discriminatory? Why is it that anything we want to do, what is most important
is where you are. So we need, number one, if I have my way, and I don't have a candidate yet, my candidate will have to promise that they are going to scrap the Federal Character Commission that is cheating Nigerians. This system can work. How come we have now? Let's look at it. ASU has been on strike for so long. People have not been going to the universities. Some of them have even forgotten as to what learning is all about. We are going to push them out. As soon as they give us money, we'll push them out. They'll go to your primary schools, they'll go to your secondary schools, they'll go to your hospitals, and they'll be practicing. Why do you expect to squeeze water from stone? So what I'm trying to say is that if we do this process properly, whereby we see inclusion, I've not seen anybody that has been recalled in spite of all the process. Either somebody will go to court that the list is forged, or either they will put something there. So I think we have to come to reality, Pat, that yes, democracy is great, but it has to be pushed under certain conditions. And that's what she's saying. I agree with you. If I go out there and I keep on asking this type of question, they will just laugh. It's either you give me my 5,000 naira or you just get out of my sight. That is what we turned our own inclusion to. Thank you.
Thank you. Very, very soon we will find out from Dr. Banire why he allowed this to happen to the political party that he was legal advisor of. But we'll come back to him very soon. But really, truly, we're talking about education. If we go back to even the American Constitution, people were not allowed to vote for a long time because it was figured that they didn't have the capacity to make choice. And so property was used as a basis for defining your learning, your capacity to make choice. And so people began to get included when it was felt that it made sense for them to reason between options. The universal adult suffrage idea in a country of uneducated people doesn't seem to make enough sense. Even though their rights are important, but these issues need to be engaged. And when people can't think more clearly, it's easy to return to the lager, to use measures like ethnic group and stuff to make a decision. And so, Professor Bero Mudiwe, who has lived in America and voted there and is now voting in Nigeria, may want to give us a bit of his own reflection on this challenge of uneducated people who can be bought and democracy.
Okay, thank you, Pat. And I think that what I want to do is to give the position of scholarship on this question that you raised. There have been many, many scholarly work on the relationship between democracy and growth. Whether democracy promotes economic growth or not. Voluminous studies. But the result is that there is no consensus. There is no agreement on the issue of democracy promoting economic growth. But a recent study on the case of Africa south of the Sahara, I don't like to call it sub-Saharan Africa, something insulting about that, but on that particular issue, there has been found a positive relationship on the effect of democracy on economic growth. And not to forget that this, our democracy that we're talking about, is a recent phenomenon. It is something that started at the end of the Cold War. Before then, there were frequent military governments, autocracies, and apartheid in South Africa.
in the subcontinent here. It's only after the Cold War released everybody that democracy started. Our own in 1999 and the rest of it. So that's one trend. The trend has been since the Cold War ended. Democratization started. And if you look at the literature, you will also find that it is within that period that another trend started. And that trend was economic growth. Our growth was rising. And so there is parallel movement, dual movement, democratization this way and growth coming. Up to the last administration, we reached in this country a level of up to 6 to 7% of growth. But all that was growth without development. So that relationship exists. That relationship that has also been found in the literature. That is that there is a distinction between democratization and consolidation of democracy. When democratization is happening, the relationship is faster in economic growth. But it remains more steady, more predictable if you have consolidated your democracy. The studies have found that countries that held on to their democracy uninterrupted for about 15 years up to 2012 did very well in economic growth. Countries such as Ghana, countries such as Benin here in our neighborhood, Botswana, South Africa, who held onto their democracies that they found from the end of the Cold War. So the issue that this symposium is addressing is an important one. It's an important one because it has been in academic literature. But in the specific case of Nigeria, I think I've been listening to talk all day, and there is a lot of attributions to democracy that does not belong to it exclusively. The president of Liberia's paper rightly praised the rise of President Weah under a democratic situation. But the point is that there are people also coming from very humble backgrounds under military rule that became heads of state. One of them is sitting here, our president. Yes, he wasn't the son of a millionaire, and he, through professionalism and achievements in his own chosen field, was able to be recognized and become a president. And even in Liberia, Sergeant Doe, we know, also became head of state. And there's so many of those exist. So too much attribution to democracy is what is burdening that concept, because it is not a bad concept in and of itself. Because what does it do? It guarantees you individual liberty. Is that a bad thing? It guarantees you equality under the law. Is that a bad thing? So just because the Cold War ended and democracies were coming on board and we started talking about democratic dividends, everybody now puts it on the shoulder of democracy if everything is going wrong in their own polity. But in Nigeria, the problem is not democracy. The problem is the system under which the democracy we have is operating. And that system is our federalism.
Okay.
It is the problem. It is not accidental that people are shouting for restructuring. Not to forget, Nigeria's federalism is not based on any theoretical foundation. It is simply based on fear. The fear of each other, fear of domination. That's what our federalism is based on. unlike in the case of America, which you asked me to say something about, American federalism is based on checking the federal power. That's what their federalism is all about. It is a system of checking the power of the national government. So you divide the power so that other units will also have power. As a matter of fact, when they first divided their power, the states had more power than the federal government, right? That's when they had confederation. And when they found that that system was weakening the national government such that it may not be able to protect the nation if faced by other countries in a hostile situation, they pushed for restructuring. And then they restructured their government so that they now take more power from the confederate
subnationals.
Yes, and then brought it to the center, making the center a little bit stronger than it was before. What we have today is a direct opposite of that. We concentrate huge powers in the hands of the center, where there is no capacity to manage anything.
Well, I think it's a very interesting direction to travel, and perhaps General Gowon may give us some insights into the conversations, but we won't come yet, sorry, General, in 1967 that led to the 12-state structure and the ultimate weakening of Nigerian federalism. But really, an important point to raise, and I return to Dr. Banire before, welcoming the one and only Femi Falana. Yeah. You know, in my early remarks, I talked about tribes, moral tribes. Sometimes we exaggerate certain things in Nigeria. When we talk about the June 12 crisis, for example, people talk about Nadeko. You know, history has been so distorted. People who were hiding in London have now become the heroes of June 12 struggle. When those of us who were shot on the streets of Lagos are forgotten. But the point I'm trying to make is that what responded in 1993 was not an ethnic tribe, it was a moral tribe. If I want to recall the concerned professional story, I, not a Yoruba person, started the process, and I can name the leaders of the concerned professionals. Nadeko, the core leaders of Nadeko were Bitu Kiwe, Ndubisi Kano, and then the General Deyinka Adebayo's and co were added to them, and that was Nadeko. These were moral tribes. Why can a moral tribe not arise and reform our political parties so that people who can come through them are people who can lead the people away from poverty that we see today? You, as legal advisor of APC, what did you do to make sure that that could happen?
Well, I'm sure that you have captured the response in your book. I listened to the review attentively, and I think the EU, like I said initially, the direction of the discussion seems to be heading towards the fact that we need to, as much as possible, move away from system, or like you put it, process, into the quality of our leaders. And like I said earlier, the genesis of the whole thing is actually from the electoral process itself. Because this moral tribe that you are talking about, we first and foremost need to reform that particular system that will give to the people what they actually deserve and they desire. And to have that, like I said, the first point is that if you look at it today, there are regulations, and I believe that if you look at all the manifestos, look at the constitution of virtually all the political parties, 91 I think now, of all of them, there's hardly any difference. There's no ideological difference to start with. Now, even in terms of the operations of this system, they are all identical. The truth of the matter is that at the end of the day, what you are looking at for, and I forgot who said, I think Dr. Abbas had said that one, that we should start looking at the pedigree of candidates, the competence of candidates, as opposed to which of the platform that is being paraded. And I believe that by the time you start having that one, you are able to change the system. If we all agree, like has been the trend or the pattern in Africa as a whole today, that we seem to be gravitating towards democracy. Not all crazy about democracy to start with. Like I said earlier, and I've given instances of elsewhere where there are people who are happier and they still do not have what we consider to be democracy. Even here, I think it was Bishop Kuka that said it, not so much in simple language, that even what we have today could not truly be described as democracy. And like some of us have always said, we are just in a civil rule as opposed to democracy. So to have that moral tribe, certainly you need the leaders. One of it is what we are doing here today, for example, now. All of us are a specific tribe, but we are all feel concerned. And I can see when the profile of each one of the people here were read, it's not about where you come from. It's actually what is your concern, what has been your pedigree, your antecedent in terms of the struggle for the enthronement of true democracy. And I believe that this is the way to go. If we all wake up and say, this is the direction we want to go, and that we all interrogate the issues that are setting us back. And like Prof said, the issue of even federalism and another thing completely. But first, how do we get credible, good leaders? And I think that's the first thing we must continuously agitate. If we have good leaders, I believe that at the end of the day, all others will start falling in place one by one. Like the minister, His Excellency, the President of Liberia equally said that, look, when he got in now, he discovered that so many things over time had been wrong. And he's beginning to change them because he has a vision for the nation. And the same thing will certainly happen if we manage eventually to have somebody who is a good leader with good grasp of the issues that are involved. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. Let me turn quickly to FF. Is democracy making life better in Africa? Nigeria in particular. Okay, take this one. Give me this.
Well, I thank you very much. First of all, I would like to apologize for my lateness. We're working in Abuja, about 800 Nigerians who shouldn't be in prison in the Federal Capital Territory. I've been held in custody for about 2-3 years. We're trying to get them out, so I was busy in Abuja this morning. Having said that, let me confess ab initio that my approach may be a bit different from my colleagues. While I thank my very good friend Pat Utomi for continuing to repose confidence in the elite, and that is why we gather here talking about leadership, we have missed it. Let's be honest. Our problem, we shouldn't waste so much time. You and I have wasted so much time on leadership. We should now go to the followership. You will have good leaders in our country if we develop our people. We can stay here and be wasting our time analyzing what will happen next week or thereabout by simply using our telephone and sending all manners of irresponsible WhatsApp messages. We can deceive ourselves and entertain ourselves. When you look at any of those rallies, nothing to do with presidential debates. Absolutely. When you see some of the rallies, you wonder whether these are people that belong to the same Nigeria that you are talking about in your media, social media. So there is a very dangerous gulf between the people and the elite. They are going to vote next week or thereabout without any consideration to our own ideals and our ideas about having a new country. When you get to that dangerous terrain, we need to review our strategies and then go to the people to mobilize them, to ideologize them, and motivate them for a new country. You've spoken about some African countries. I'm happy. Botswana. If you talk to the leaders of Botswana today, I was talking to one of their former presidents 2 weeks ago. He said, Mr. Falana, Nigerians built our country. I said, how? He said, we have the best legal system in Africa. It was the late Akinola Aguda, who was our first Chief Justice, who laid a solid foundation for our legal system. In Botswana, you can't be talking of a head of the judiciary, the Chief Justice of a country, saying that he's a farmer, that is trading in Forex to make money, or a Supreme Court Justice telling you, I sell palm oil. The likes of Oputa, Esho, Bello, and others will be turning in their graves. Was this the Supreme Court that we built? And the elite, the leaders, lawyers, are queuing behind criminals. No, honestly speaking, because so that the problem is, my friend here, Patu Tommy, challenging Nigerian lawyers. If we get organized, we can have rule of law. We can have justice for everybody. My colleagues are saying, hey, Pat, do you know the kind of legal system we are operating? When you charge a big man or a big woman, and this was not the practice you and I met, you say somebody has stolen money. The elite leaders are talking about where he come from. Oh, people are ganging up against him. Not whether he has stolen money or not. Now, oh, people are saying, this CJ, if he were an American, he would have resigned. If our CJ were to be a Japanese, he would have committed suicide. Now, but how did we get to this monumental mess? In 1976, a Nigerian resigned as a head of a government agency. The late Asholari was the chairman of the Public Complaints Commission. He was driving in Ibadan himself, didn't have a driver, no official driver, he was driving. So the police stopped him and asked for his driving license. Instead of saying, don't you know me? I am so person. He said, I'm sorry, I didn't take my driving license when I was leaving because I was rushing to the office. Sorry, sir, we are booking you. The man got to the office and resigned. The late Muritala Mohammed called him, who appointed him, sir, don't you have a license? He said, I have one, but don't you have it at home? I have it. You have 24 hours to produce it, sir. He said, I know, but I have laid a bad example. And I'm not going back to that office. That was Nigeria that many of us grew up to know. Yes, I'm happy. The former head of state is here. A former military head of state, General Yakubu Gowon. He went back to school. After ruling the country for 9 years, some of them were so honest. The Jembe ones, the Haruna, they went back to school. We know a lot is missing from the rulership of the country. So we want to go back to school and learn. Others became so arrogant and then pretended to be intellectuals. They talk to all of us, they abuse us, pretenders. Others did not go back to school. You will not find them in any intellectual engagement like this. And that is why we are in this mess. If we therefore want to get out of it, sir, after the 12th, let me just conclude. Yes, my friend is talking about restructuring. Beautiful. Beautiful. But please, when you talk of devolution of powers, you must talk of responsibilities of power. Between 1999 and now, We have done a number of cases. My friends are here. Banira in particular, I say. We've done a number of cases where powers have been transferred from Abuja to the state. Local government funds used to be the business of Abuja. I'm sure you are all aware when President Obasanjo seized and impounded the funds of Lagos. We went to court, and the court said, thou shalt release the money. Of course, the President Obasanjo disregarded the Supreme Court, which would be very strange to a former head of state here. Even as a military ruler, how can you disagree with the judgment of the court, of the Supreme Court? But that was what happened. We also went there. State government shall conduct local government. It's not the business of the federal government. The Supreme Court upheld. Physical planning used to be the business of Abuja. We won that case. I cannot go on and on. But what have we done with those powers? Seized from Abuja. Now, no state government in Nigeria, including Lagos, conducts credible local government election. No state in Nigeria. It's a one-party affair when it comes to local government. 2, all the state governments in Nigeria, including Lagos, a cosmopolitan state, all have dissolved elected local government and imposed appointed administrators or caretaker committees, which is totally alien to the this our rickety constitution. Furthermore, all the funds, there are 3 tiers of government under this constitution. All the state governments have cornered the funds of the local government. That is why you must have a one-party state, so that nobody will question the looting of the treasury of the local government. So please, sir, when you are talking of restructuring, be careful so that you don't transfer more powers to emperors. And that is what is going on in our country. Every state government in Nigeria is more powerful than the president. Quote me. A state governor in Nigeria decides who will be governor, who will be senator, who will be a House of Rep member, who will be in the House of Assembly, who will be a speaker, a governor. The president doesn't have such powers, you know. So when you have that kind of arrangement, and there's what they call security vote, but you can't talk of democracy in Nigeria without attacking the menace, the root cause of evil, security vote. It doesn't happen anywhere in the world. General Gowon will be surprised here that a governor or a head of state takes billions of naira without accounting for it. One young man, a governor, I think he's about 50 now. He was a governor for 8 years in his 40s. His security vote for 8 years was 98 billion naira. So that young man decides now who will be president of our country, who should be governors of anywhere in the country. That is the kind of system we're operating. When I was contesting, I wanted to be a governor of my state in 2003. I didn't know I was taking a risk. No, I'm telling you. So that we can let you know our experience. I was told, and my friend Pat has just experienced that. Please, please. The system is totally opposed for now. Good people. Emergence of good governor. The system is totally opposed to it. So, to be a governor, in any of the states now, you will need not less than 5 billion naira. So you must have stolen, or you have a criminal as your sponsor. Secondly, please, secondly, you will need a number of young men who would be able-bodied men, not women, thugs, who will be drugged every day to go and attack your political opponents. And when they do that, you will also get a band of lawyers to take them out of trouble if they are arrested enemies. Now, if you are going to operate in that cultural milieu, political milieu, you know we are not ready yet. I therefore would like to submit that for you to have new leaders in Nigeria, you will need new followers. And to do that, yes, but my friend, Dr. Banire, we cannot run a country on the basis of good people. No. What makes them good? You can't talk of the pedigree of individual. We need ideologically based political parties. In the Second Republic, you will know the dichotomy between UPN, talking about free education, and MPN, talking about housing and the rest of them. Now, nobody talks about anything. In all this arrangement, and those who want to go to the next level and others, please, nobody is talking about the 13.2 million who are roaming the streets. Now, in other parts of the world, the Japanese children, Chinese children, and American children, they are learning computer in the primary school, in their homes. Now, our own kids are on the street. So why will Boko Haram, bandits and armed robbers and kidnappers not get easy recruits from the children that we have abandoned? And that's why we all deceive ourselves. We have our palaces in Lekki and the rest of them. GRA, Ikeja, and the rest of them.
Where family lives.
No, I live with the people in Ikeja. Now, the point I'm making, please. The point I'm making. We have abandoned the people, the poor. We now deceive ourselves that we are living in our own cocoon of poverty. Poverty of ideas. I don't mean wealth. Yeah. So we must begin, sir, to build the people, to organize the people. Not the leader. The leaders will be compelled. Once we have educated those who believe it is normal to steal government money, and then you become Babake. Now, if you want to therefore succeed, sir, I would like to suggest that your next program should be held in Ajegule or Muson, so that we can talk to the people. Thank you.
That is, I want to submit. This is the original Ajegule man here. The great Fred Agbayegbe. I think that it is important. I want to state that it's important that CVL has been having programs in Ajegule for a long time. So, but now Emeka is suggesting that the next time we are going to Ajegule, we should bring FF to come and talk with them, because we need to truly mobilize them. But moving on, I'm going to go quickly back to Professor Bida Kube, and we're going to begin to round up. If there is one thing that we must suggest to make this democracy work for the people, Nigeria has become the poverty capital of the world. We know the statistics. We know that it is projected from the Bill Gates Foundation that between Nigeria and DRC, two enormously endowed countries, will have 40% of the poorest people on the planet. What must our democracy do to change those conditions?
Equality. We must be truly equal. The major issue, as I've said, is that as long as the system we have now, a distorted system of governance, you are going to get many, many more. Because the only thing you control is procreation. Your system has been such to deny those poor people every other opportunity at education at good health, and even participation in the political process. And that is the truth of the matter. I think we must go back to 1960 or thereabout, when we were growing up, and when the first time I heard about the word egalitarian society, we must go back to that. Let everybody, I went to school in Lagos, I went to school in the region, I even went to school in Aba. We did not know as much children what is the difference between all of us. Now the first thing that is going on now is this tribal climb, because we have no substance. You see, we have no substance. So I think we must go back to this equality. We must look at democracy as inclusion, and it's not going to be at only the election time that we start mobilizing. I like what Femi said. Let us start to take some of these matters to the people, to the grassroots. And Pat, you are doing wonderfully well, but we must really, emancipate, as it were, our people. Thank you.
Okay, but by the way, talking about the people, aren't those same people the ones that fill all these stadia every day, all these rallies? I never know where they come from. Where do they come out from?
You should know that.
So, Emeka, quick closing thoughts. What do we do to get out of this mess and make democracy work for most of our people?
One area I think we can never run away from, even after we have mobilized the people, as Femi said, is the process of recruitment of leaders. Sometimes we take it for granted that leaders must come through the normal process through which they're coming now. Femi has done primary, you have done primary. I'm sure that both of you don't even understand the process through which those who won were selected. You don't. The opaqueness of that process must be broken. And you don't break it by abandoning the system. You break it by fighting in the system, which is where Femi lost it. And I see you are beginning to step out of it. No. There may not be many people of your stature, of your character, of your values that are still doing politics now. And they're doing it the wrong way. You have to stay in there and fight. What has happened is that once they treat you badly, you realize immediately that you are not part of these people and you abandon them. And they continue in that opaque manner to recruit the leaders that you're getting. How were the presidential candidates selected? All of them that are running. How were the governorship candidates? Some of them were selected in the middle of the night where nobody was. Some of them were selected in the shrines. Some of them were selected in the occult for you. And then some of them were made to swear, if you're going to do this is how you'll be a governor. We have to stay there and break through that process. If you don't, and we have to get many young people to take interest in politics, not as chorus leaders. Let them go and campaign to run for office. You will fail once. George Opongwe started dreaming of being president of Liberia for a very long time. He failed once, he failed twice. Even our president had been trying to be president again, Mark II, according to somebody, Father Kuka. And he failed and failed and failed until we went and dragged him from retirement. He had actually retired. But we have to stay there. You have to begin to challenge those ethos that are running our political system. And we have done a bit in the media, but I think that the media is also beginning to catch this of the political elite, which is simply to abandon. We cannot change anything, let's just forget, let's ignore them. We cannot ignore the opaqueness of the selection, the recruitment process. If you want to recruit a manager for your company, you advertise it. You give the qualifications. Nigerian presidency and governorship and senatorial seats, members of the House, members of the Assembly are the only ones that are never advertised. You don't know the qualification they have to possess. It's not even secondary school certificate. That's no qualification. What character, what ideas, what insight. Look, we're talking of 13 million Nigerian youths on the street. I had, Father Kuka is gone, I had that culture shock when I appeared in Sokoto for the first time. I'd never seen anything like that, living in Lagos virtually all my life. But in Sokoto, I saw it real life, and I thought there was something wrong. But the people I was with didn't see anything amiss in what I was experiencing. I was shocked. But I couldn't ask any one of them. I had to learn. They put the crowd of young boys, over 300 following us walking. They put a bowl of food. In a matter of a minute, they were like flies. They finished the food, licked their hands, and walked away. Why will you not have armed robbers tomorrow? A leader, any leader in Nigeria, and says, how are we going to change this country? He says, in 15 years' time, this is my vision, years' time, we should have Nigeria as a supplier of quality manpower to the whole of Africa. You're still dealing with Amajiri kids. You set a vision that is almost impossible to meet. For you to do that, you are going to put money in primary education. You're going to put money in secondary education. You're going to put money in tertiary education. You're going to put money in the other social sectors, health, population. But nobody thinks like that in Nigeria. We're fighting corruption. We want to finish the project that we started. We're going to supply electricity. We're going to build road. Any joker can build road for you. It doesn't need to be a governor or president. Once he has money, he can find people to build road for you from anywhere in the world. What they cannot do for you is to tell you where your country should be in 15, 20, 30, 50 years' time. No leader that I know in this country has volunteered. They don't even recognize that. The only way we're going to change this is to begin to do this battle. June 12th, how did he get the business sector which you were part of to get involved? Because it started hitting their pocketbooks. We have to find how to make what the bad governance in this country to hit the pocketbook, the pocket of the rich people and the comfortable people. The day they cannot drive their good cars on the street of Lagos, the day they cannot hold all these outlandish weddings and parties all over this country, in a country that you say is poverty-stricken, you need to go to attend a party in this town on Saturday. And you know the center, and you don't think that there's anything wrong with this place. The day they go to receive all these awards that they're getting awards, they're condemning the people giving them the award in the hall, but they're there to receive the awards. The day we challenge all those, then we would have started making progress. And I think it's possible. And I think it can be done in a short time. In 2010, Abacha of all people set up Vision 2010. And this is where I stop. Telling you the vision can be effective. Pat was there. I think Prof was there. Femi was not there. I was there. And I'm taking the softest recommendation from the sports subgroup. They said in the year 2010, Nigeria will host the World Cup. Soccer. Nobody had a clue whether Soccer World Cup was going to come to Africa. But the report of Vision 2010 said, in 2010, the Soccer World Cup must hold in Africa and Nigeria will host it and win it. In 2010, World Cup was actually held in Africa, but you went to South Africa. Because you didn't follow through on the vision. You put all the timeline, deliverables. They didn't want it because it turned out to be contrary to what the people who set up that committee wanted to have. If we keep running away from these people, they will keep getting away with murder. And we have to stay there. Pat, stay there. Femi, go back there. Contest a second time, a third time. One day you're going to get there. When you get there, you may a massive change. Because you have a way. I know Kayode fire me. I know how Kayode used to sound also. But he's there. You know how difficult it can be when you get there. But you will make a change in one area. When you leave, they will not be able to change it anymore. Thank you very much.
So, staying on this theme of educating our people, we can reap a huge demographic dividend from this youth bulge, but we are managing it so badly. Why is it impossible to have a conversation on this matter in an election year? I have not seen any articulation of the problem of Nigeria's youth bulge, the possibilities that are positive of getting a demographic dividend from it, and the danger of the coming anarchy if we don't manage it well. Why are we not discussing on an election year? What can we do around that as a final word in making this democracy work for the people of Africa? Professor Eberong-Diwe.
Okay. Well, I think that the problem of our country, like what Femi said, is not only with the leadership. Glorifying the followership is easy, but part of our problem is bad followership. It is the followership that is paid and they accept money for stomach infrastructure. It is the followership that is packing up the stadium that you talk about. They recruit them, and they go from one party stadium to another party stadium. It's the same followership that you want to go and meet. So I think that the big problem we have is a problem of leadership recruitment. It is an important problem that neither the PDP or APC pays any attention to. And we are made up of a population that is easy to be bought off and pays no mind to the excesses that Femi talked about. 96 billion naira. What fund was it?
ATM, security vote.
Security vote. Everybody knows this has been going on, but who has done anything about it? Not the Bar Association, not any interest group. We are a country heavy on identifying problems, but very weak on doing anything about it. We are the followers, we that are not in government. So sitting around and blaming leadership is not enough. Blaming ourselves as the followers, those who are not in power, is a way of holistically treating our problem. Another problem that we have in our country is the de-emphasis on the source of wealth. Our dependence on government for wealth. Some of the people that have made the biggest monies in this country have something to do with government, or they are partners when they are in government outside. There is so much dependence on government, and that government depends on oil, which is a resource that is fast getting to be irrelevant when compared to the modern source of money, which is the mind. The source of wealth today, somebody mentioned that with the Facebook founder, is the mind. The richest people in the world today did not make their money from oil fields. They made their money by figuring what people want and doing something about it. And this country is not paying attention to that because this country is one of the smallest spenders on education. It doesn't budget for education as much as is required by the United Nations. I listened to a talk recently where there was a great analysis of what Nigeria needs. That talk was given by Mr. Usman Bugaje in Abuja. And I have talked to him and tell him to try to publish that talk, because it's really a clean analysis of what else this country. Everybody gives, for example, the great example of Rwanda. But what was the first problem that Rwanda solved? It started with a basic thing called unity. If you drive on the streets of one of its cities and you ask a taxi driver, where are you from? He will not tell you he is Yoruba. He will not tell you he is Tutsi. He will not tell you, what's the other one?
This is the last round.
Pardon?
Okay.
Yeah, Tutsi and Hutu, yes.
Hutus.
Yes, yeah. He would just, if you told him, if you asked him, as Usman said,
Yeah.
are you Tutsi or Hutu? He would say no. Rwanda. No, we have never reached that stage. So if you are blaming democracy, you have to find out how you are practicing it. Just raising it up, rabble-rousing it, and saying it is not working is not enough. It's not enough. Why is it not working in this country? It is not working because nobody loves this country. This country is just a place where you make money. And the division is on the haves and the have-nots.
Yeah. Okay.
Nobody cares about the income differentials. Nobody cares about the gap between the rich and the poor.
Okay, Barry.
All they do is...
Thanks. Time is not our best friend. We have got to move very quickly to a close. I'll ask Toyosi to make a 1 minute flat contribution to this same question of a demographic dividend, the youth, and the role that young people play. They are becoming involved, and how that can make a difference very quickly. Then we'll take 3 quick questions, only 3 quick questions, one from each of these sides. And
Prof, you are not being democratic if I'm the youngest person on this panel, and you ask me to speak about young people in 1 minute and give others 5 minutes each. Do we agree? I'll take a few minutes and just quickly make my comments. The first thing I wanted to talk about is that the determination of the criminals in Nigeria is incredible. The energy and conviction of the average thief in Nigerian government is unmatched when you put a good person side by side him. They will go to jail, come back from jail, and continue their criminality. We, the good guys, get tired so easily. Mr. Femi Falana ran once and decided to retire. He says he took a risk. Some people ran severally, and we don't even know where we're going. We feel like they took power in 2005, and they're taking us to the next level of 2009, when we're going to 2019. Now, Professor, I'm going to speak directly to the young people in the room. INEC released, if you got my pun, you can laugh later when you get home. INEC released the results, the report on the number of registered voters in Nigeria a few days ago. And Business Day put it into a graph. The highest number of registered voters for 2019 election are Nigerian students, 22.3 million. Far away, followed far away by people who are farmers and into fishing at about 11 million. And ASU has been on strike for 3 months. I don't know about you, but I think that poverty is a weapon of control in Nigeria. Such that the reason that the poor person is never going to be able to use his brain to think, that the poor person, the average Nigerian, will only watch industrialization in China, but never dream it for Nigeria. I feel like that's the country that we're growing. And unfortunately, our generation have become the keyboard warriors and the Instagram generation that pontificate on the non-issues. And we forget that if you are not on the table, you are on the menu. That if you don't participate in the political process, you are going to be eaten up. Now, the leadership recruitment process in itself is fundamentally faulty. But what is even a bigger problem is the youth wing and the women wing of those political parties. The tokenism, that the only role that a young person must have in a political party that has hierarchy of about 15 people is just the youth leader. The youth leader himself being 57 years old, way above the life expectancy rate of Nigerians. Somebody who typically doesn't have much education and is not able to engage with your problems and your issues. People who fly first class with their families. And I want us to know that as a generation, there are people who are consistently benefiting from our misfortune. And we have a reason and a right to understand that democracy in itself is an inclusive society where every human being has value because every human being has a vote. And that in 2019 elections, we the people may not win because we didn't start early enough. I like to be realistic, but 2023, which is 4 years from now, presents a brilliant challenge. It hurt me because the smart young candidates who decided to run and form the third force woke up 6 months to election, wishful thinking, hoodwinking, disagreeing between each other, and the pact itself fell apart. When in fact, we should have started 4 years ago, decided to present a common front. There's no way they can run us out because the power in the people is greater than the people in the party. Now, I will close by saying two things. I believe there are practical ways out of this. The first practical way is, Professor, the glorification of ill-gotten wealth in this country has to come to an end.
It has to stop.
A country where we celebrate people who have money, but we don't know the root of their monies. Where the people who actually do the hard work do not get recognition as much as the people who have stolen money and are able to buy themselves awards, recognitions, and chieftaincy titles. We, the people, gather in those celebrations. That's why there's an audience before whom they receive awards. If they were receiving an award and you were booing in the crowd, they won't turn out for the award in the coming year. So you need to be able to reduce that glorification of ill-gotten wealth. Number two is that people like Mr. Femi Falana need to lead the advocacy of a nation of consequences. You talked about Mr. Taisho Larin resigning. Let me give you a more extreme example of the minister in Singapore who had connived with contractors to collect kickbacks from them. And Lee Kuan Yew had found out before he was even called to question, he committed suicide and left a note saying that he would rather die than face the consequences. We cannot be talking about democracy being, making the lives of our people better when our resources, when we are a technical aristocracy and an oligarchy, where our resources are concentrated in the hands of a few people who would rather even steal those ones that the generations after us are going to take. And so this election in 2019 is for the young people. ASU is on strike. You've got children, cousins, many of you are students in this crowd. 22.3 million voters. 10 days we have. But you know what to do with your PVCs. I thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, thank you. Thank you. Thanks. Very good. I'll take a question from this side. Maybe Modestus, can you help me? Because I don't have the problem.
All right. There are 2 microphones. You can come to the aisles for your questions and contributions. Please, we're asking you that you keep them short, simple, and concise. Okay, we'll take it into the audience. Keep them short and simple. Please introduce yourself, your name, and let's go straight to the point. And if it's for a specific person or a panelist, please identify them.
My name is Francis Abioye. I am the founder and the president of African Initiative Against Corruption and Examination Malpractice. This will be the very first time I will be impressed with our son, the famous lawyer, Femi Falana. You have mentioned the strategies that is the needed tools to revolutionize this country. And the major challenge in Nigeria, not that we don't have the men that carries the light to lighten the darkness, but we are lighting the light wrongly. When you lighten the candle.
Please, a question, not a speech.
No,
very
not,
short,
not a speech, not a
yes,
speech, please.
Yes, very short, yes.
We lighten our candle without minding the wind, blowing it and putting it off. When we lighten our light, we should cover it and safeguard it. So my contribution is, please, excuse me.
Okay, 30 seconds and we close, yes.
I'm making a contribution, not a question.
Conclude it, please.
My contribution is, I want to make a passionate appeal that all the civil society of Nigeria, like the Coalition of Civil Society Group of Nigeria, should have a framework that will not be pronounced. Get a gathering where all those strategies, because the wicked men that are killing this country work with strategies, and those strategies are not pronounced. Let us have a secret strategies that we are going to implement against the 2023.
All right, sir. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. My question is, this program is a program that takes place every year. And you can see that from what we have seen here today, we have discussed Nigeria and we have discussed our problems and challenges. The question is, how can we use this platform to translate all these discussions into practical steps that will affect the leadership structure in Nigeria democratically in such a manner that by the time we come here next year, the issues that we are discussing today will not come back here to discuss it next year. That's my question.
All right, thank you. Please, let's not have anyone else come up for now. Let's finish this and find out if we have more time. All right.
My contribution is this. To Professor Pat Utomi and CVL, I wish to congratulate you for the past efforts in Nigeria. I came in contact with Utomi in 1977 when I was lecturing at Nsukka University. He was in my class, Mascom 351. He and his very close friend, late Seme Agwali, I prophesied could change this country. 40 years after my prophecy is coming true. In the US, when I learned he was to run as a governor of Delta State, I almost booked my flight to return. But now, as the last speaker said, the next challenge I'm giving you is to set a challenge in the next 5 years that CVL will produce the core of leadership to revolutionize this. Don't forget what Professor Ben Mwabeze said. In a public lecture, Mwabeze advocated the French model of 1789. J.J. Rawlings, in a lecture in Nigeria, also said, I will not tell you what to do in Nigeria, but I transform Ghana. Now, in 2019, 60 years away, Nigeria is underdeveloping. And in 34 years' time, will be the 6th richest, poorest country in the world. Therefore, CVL challenged to set a 5-year target. 5 years, using your platform, with support from all over the world, Nigerians, you are going to produce the core of leaders who can.
Good day, everyone.